share this, yes.
I call this meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Porter.
I'm here.
Councilmember Austin Lane. Here. Councilmember Barry. Here. Councilmember Clay. Here. Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Snipper.
Here.
Councilmember Williams.
Here.
Are there any council comments or announcements? Actually, I'd like to begin by noting that we have the first of our budget work session discussions this evening. We're going to go generally over the general fund and fund balance. And then starting at this point, we will have budget work sessions every Thursday until we finish discussing the budget. At this point, we are scheduled to do the final passage of the budget in early June. So during the rest of the month of May, I anticipate that there will be discussions Monday and Thursday of each week, and then final passage of the budget in early June. Are there any other council comments or announcements? Terry and then Joy.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. This last Saturday, the council was invited to walk through Ward 4 and see our neighborhood, visit with some of the residents of the neighborhood. I appreciate the members who were able to fit it in their schedule and come walk through the neighborhood. I think that it was a good opportunity for the residents to meet with council members, talk about their issues and concerns, and also to highlight the things that they think are so good about Tacoma Park. The walk ended at the Piney Branch Middle School, where the Tacoma Park Community Action Group, in partnership with A Child's Voice, hosted the Children First Day celebration. And again, I'd like to thank all those people who helped to organize that event. I think it was a very nice event that highlighted the importance of the children in our community. I look forward to seeing next year's event celebrating Children First Day. There were many speakers, many organizations there, many people that came to visit, and I just thank everyone for making it such a good event. Thank you.
Just wanted to brief the council on the Montgomery College Neighbors Committee meeting that took place last week, and I'm pleased to say we had 5 members attend and 4 interested applicants attend. And the committee elected a chair that will serve from now until September, when they'll have annual elections. They'll be meeting May 30th to start reviewing the work plan they'd like to set up. And this meeting was kind of a transitional one. As you know, some members have resigned, but we did have a very productive session with Glenn Krieger of Park and Planning and Alana Blanchard, our senior planner for the city, who's the staff person for this committee, brief the committee members and others interested about the zoning and the mandatory review process, mandatory referral process that the college would go through before making any exterior changes to their building. The committee also reviewed a resolution at their meeting, and I'm very encouraged that they seem to be having very constructive collaboration among themselves, as well as with the college officials. The provost, Brad Stewart, and David Kapp were at the meeting as well. So just wanted to keep you informed about that.
Yeah, I just want to congratulate Historic Tacoma on a very successful Tacoma Park House and Garden tour yesterday. I know there was a pretty large crowd of people going around, and I know that residents, particularly on Sherman Avenue, also on Carroll Avenue, enjoyed the opportunity to share their houses and their gardens. And I know that on Sherman Avenue there were enough houses there and enough people that kind of turned into a little bit of an impromptu block party, and I know that everybody enjoyed it.
I attended the Health Services Impact Committee meeting last Tuesday with other folks from the council, and it was very, very informative. The president of Washington Adventist Hospital came and talked to us about the hospital's purchase of land outside of the city limits where they intend to move their hospital. And I talked to several members on the committee, and they have a lot of work to do and probably an expanding role in the way they're going to do that work. And I think they would like to have more community members to sign up for that committee. So I would encourage anyone who has an interest in overall health services of the city or the specific services that are currently being provided by Washington Adventist and potentially the site there to consider signing up for the committee. It's going to be very active and a lot of work to do in the coming months, and they're going to need a lot of help. So I would say this is the all hands on deck call. There's an, I don't say it's an emerging issue, but it's an issue that is definitely becoming more prominent, and that is coping with stormwater issues. And we have a lot of development happening along Ethan Allen. We've had several new properties that have been expanded there, new houses built behind existing houses, kind of key lot properties developed. And all of that stormwater drains down in between Ethan Allen and Woodland down in through Forest Park. And a lot of the residents there are noting a lot of increases in the amount of runoff water and erosion impact and have concerns about that. There's a particular property that I've been talking to county permitting, county sediment control, Valerie Irvin's office, our planning department, and the public works director about sedimentary issues, but it seems like it's an overall issue. And I had some conversations with the public works director about maybe how we could encourage our residents to work together where they all have kind of a common interest. We were talking about, swales that run along a property line where it's running down a hill like that, where everybody could kind of work together. And so I think we're going to need to do something and maybe be a little bit proactive about thinking about that as an issue, especially as people are expanding the size of their old, 2-bedroom and 3-bedroom houses and add-ons and pouring concrete, and we're getting more impermeable surface. It's becoming a bigger issue. And the last thing that I wanted to bring up is that the signs are up in the circle at Elm and Lincoln, and it would be great if the police would come and ticket people in the morning and the evening, particularly the blue band that likes to run through at 50 miles an hour.
I am declaring, which is about the only thing I can do, the month of June as Invite a Neighbor to a Meal month in Ward 6. And this will be an opportunity for people who are isolated or feel estranged for whatever reason to come to a meal at one of their neighbors. And the guideline is that you don't know the person that you're going to invite, but that you will go and issue an invitation, breakfast, lunch, dinner, they all can be included. And any weekend during the month of June, have somebody that you don't know but that you've seen around, would like to get to know a little better, and have them by for a meal. And if others in the city would like to extend this into their own areas, I would certainly welcome that to happen. Take a neighbor for a meal. And of course, you reserve the right, if you see that they have a very large number of people in their household, to select someone else, as budgets may be constrained.
Sounds like a great idea. All right, if there's nothing else, we have no additional agenda items, so we move on to public comment period. This is the time that's set aside on the agenda for comments on items that are not on our special session or public hearing agendas. We have quite a few public hearings and special session items. But if you want to make a comment on something that's on our work session agenda or anything else that you would like to bring before the council, now would be the time. I would ask when you come forward if you would identify yourself and if you could keep your comments to 3 minutes, please. Okay.
Yes, my name is Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park. One thing I want to do is invite everybody to come down on Mother's Day in front of the White House. We're going to be having a Mother's Day peace rally, you know, because enough of our mothers, sons and daughters have died in Iraq and around the world. We've lost enough of them already. And we'd like to, you know, continue working for nonviolence like we did last Saturday. And also, if you can bring your children down and everything else down, Code Pink is one of the main organizers of this rally down here at the front of the White House. And it's going to be a great Mother's Day. It's going to be a great way to show love to your mother by coming down and celebrating peace and justice and working for peace and to help end the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Also, I wanted to tell people how great it was down at the Children's First Rally. I even brought the peace sign down to that to show people, you know, that give the kids something to look up to. Give them a better image to look up to rather than the gangs and the drugs. Because I think if we include the children in different events like this, we can teach them peace and justice and show them the right path to go. And that way we can take them out of the clutches of the gangs and take them away from the crack man. And we can give the kids something positive to look forward to, which I'm really hoping we can do. Because if we don't do it, remember the crack man and the gang man is out there waiting for them. We have got to be a more positive, more powerful influence over our kids than the devil of a gangster we have out there now. And the third thing I'd like to do is just remind everybody that May the 2nd was Terry Seaman's birthday. I don't know if you know that. He turned 61 years of age. Well, I'm turning 52 pretty soon. I should talk. But Terry Seamans, our council member of Ward 4, the greatest ward in our city, is turning 61 years of age. And I think he's still a kid at heart. But, yeah, he's great. And I think everybody should clap their hands, and, you know, for that one. All right. Terry Seamans, 61 years of age. All right. But and again, we had a great rally down at the Washington Monument. We had the impeach demonstration down there. Again, I was down there up in front of the, up on top of the letter A at the apex, had the peace sign up at that. And I'd like to see Tacoma Park a lot more involved in this. I'd like to see a lot more people from Tacoma Park coming down to these events. Bring your kids. Show them the right path. Don't be afraid to bring your kids down to the demonstrations. That's the way you can teach your kids about our social justice. Bring them over to the city council meetings. Bring them a lot more Tacoma Park people out here. Learn about your city government. Learn about how what we can do to make our government, our world, a better place. Thank you very much. And remember, peace and justice rules in Tacoma Park.
Thank you, Pat.
I hope to see you down there on Mother's Day.
Hi, my name is Tibawa Safa. I'm a member of the Tacoma Park Community Action Group. I just took my time to come here and say thank you to those of you who've taken your time on a busy Saturday to be with us. It was a very successful day for us. We worked very, very hard. So I thought today, I said, I have to return the favor. I have to go in person and thank everybody, the staff and the council and the mayor. Thank you very much, and I hope your support will be with us. We're really determined to make Tacoma Park a very vibrant. We're going to galvanize the community to create a very vibrant community. It will take the public, the government, and private businesses to bring a community to a vibrancy. So thank you, and we look forward to your support in all our other future ventures. And like Pat said, the children were very excited. My kids were very, very thrilled about this. And I have a personal interest in this, and thank you once again.
Well, thank you very much for all the work that you and the other members of the group did. It was a fantastic event, and you had obviously done a lot of work in organizing and putting it together, and I thought it came off very well.
Mayor Porter, Mr. Assefa reminds me that I was remiss in thanking staff and Barb Matthews for attending the council walk through Ward 4. They also were very helpful in walking the ward and meeting the residents and discussing the neighborhood and how we can improve it. Thank you, Barb.
Anyone else? Yes.
Good evening. Nellie Moxley of Pinecrest area. I have a couple of questions. One, I'm going to direct at you, Bruce. There's a lot of houses that's being redone. On the way up here on Allegheny, I only saw one with a permit on it. So maybe you should check into that. Maybe we've discussed a few and need to go over this again. They're being enlarged and they're having garages put on the back. And listening to Ms. Clay tonight, some of these places that you're doing, you're going to have to do a little bit more of observation due to the fact they're going over the stream areas. I know you hear me constantly, and this is old news as far as Nellie's concerned, but the area is full of streams, and they're over them. So you need to look into this, and it's Allegheny Avenue. Also, Fifth Avenue is still determined to demolish that building, and according to the Montgomery County law now, it has to go through the city in order for a building to be demolished now, so you need to look into that also. There's a lot of things going on in this area now that needs to be looked at, not only in his ward, but in a lot of them. They're being enlarged, they're going over the stream beds. So you need to start taking a little more looks in your wards to see just exactly where the lands are and how they're graded and how they're done as to the lines and the markings. And you're going to have to go back to your maps in order to make sure, even if the city, even if Montgomery County gives them an okay, that you come back on them and say, well, wait a minute, because this is your town. Okay, that's the one thing I wanted to say. I know I'm run out of time here. One other thing is, I know you're going to have a thing on the taxes. And I'm not going to speak directly as to the amounts and so on, but I do have one thing to say. If you want us to bring things up to the assessments, you cannot raise these taxes up anymore, because people cannot pay the taxes, do the taxes, and then turn around and fix everything up to grooming and sweeping as a household inside. On the outside, if it keeps going up. So think about this when you start doing your thing tonight, because you're right now over the amount.
Okay. Anyone else?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. First off, I have a couple items. First off, I want to thank you again for the mayoral proclamation. For my brother Ted and myself, we appreciate that. And he's down in Florida. I'm not sure how much he'll be volunteering up this area. The other thing I want to mention, and a lot of you probably have heard, or it's not in the papers as yet, it'll be tomorrow, that serious fire they had in Kensington, where an elderly couple died in a fire. That really kind of flashed back to Tacoma Park, and I want to say in the area of 15 years. I didn't really go back and look at the date, but about 15, we lost an elderly couple in Tacoma Park. And I just have a few notes in reference to that for y'all and the citizens out there that is listening and watching the show here. It's possible that this fire in Kensington, that I understand, they're still investigating. It started in the kitchen. There was no, one report is no smoke alarms. That's a no-no. But that there was no smoke alarms that I heard reported in the homes. In the last year or so, there's been 8 to 10 fire deaths in Montgomery County, and there are most, if not all, were the elderly. And we really, they have a task force, then County Executive Duncan appointed a task force to look into this, is what they can do on the seniors, especially that all these fire deaths are mostly seniors. But I put a couple of notes down here. There are 4,000 people die each year in the United States, and it's the young and the elderly. Young and the elderly. We must, out there, we must check on our families, especially if they live alone, especially, it could be anyone, but especially families, your uncle, your aunt, or your grandfather, or we need to check on them. And this is what's happening. We kind of, and then sometimes they want to be independent, and they don't want you to take and come in and check on them. But we need to check on them and make sure that they have smoke alarms at work. Make sure that, what if, are they cooking? Should they be cooking? And that's the other thing. Should they be cooking, maybe they're not stable to be, or leave something cooking on the stove. Cooking, unattended cooking is the #1 cause of home fires. Smoking materials is #1 where people die in fires. And it's pretty much stayed like that. So I just wanted, lastly, is to mention that we need to check on them. And the fire department, which is, as you know, is a combination fire service, that we have 8 career firefighters up at the fire station right now, that they're there for you in the event of an emergency, 24/7, 365. So they're there. It's a combination city, a combination fire department, career and volunteer. We give away free smoke alarms. The only hitch to it is we will install them. We won't just give them out, come by the fire station. We will install them to make sure they're properly installed. We also will do free home inspection, safety inspection, fire safety inspection of the home. All you got to do is call. That's 301-270-4242. So we just really got to be careful out there. We're there for you, but one life is too many. But this one really, it's only up at Kensington, but we lost a senior family, an elderly family. So we're there for you, and we got to be safe when it comes to fire.
Thank you, Chief Jarbo. I appreciate that. I actually, when I saw the news about the elderly couple in Kensington, I thought about the elderly couple we lost, too, because that was in Ward 2 when I was representing the ward, and I still remember it, yes.
The other thing is we have a lot of old homes. They really look beautiful, but, we just don't know if a fire starts, and if you don't have an early warning like a smoke alarm, and call 911, it can be all over real quick.
Right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Would anyone else like to speak? All right, we will move on to the city manager's update.
Yes, I just have 2 brief items this evening. Obviously, we did the Ward 4 council walk on Saturday. I wanted to share with Councilmember Siemens in particular, but certainly the whole council, that the staff is in the process of compiling a list of issues that arose out of that walk, and we'll be sharing that with the council. But we do plan to follow up on those. Also wanted to just update the community and the council on the issue I had raised I think it was last week, which has to do with our tax duplication payments from Montgomery County. As I reported to the council, the MFP committee of the county council, basically by a vote of 2-1, voted to put the issue of the amount of tax duplication payments that would go to the municipalities on their reconciliation list. One of the things that I learned last week is that this is not being put on the county council agenda as an all or nothing proposition. Essentially, there are increments of the payment that would go to the municipalities based on the county executive's recommendation, kind of so you could piecemeal it. The concern that we as a staff have is that by kind of parsing that into smaller bits, it may lead the county council to feel as if they could basically give us some portion of it, kind of split the baby, if you will, and that may end up being harmful to the city's receipt of the full allotment that the county executive has recommended. At this point, we are certainly as a staff trying to make the appropriate contacts. We are not certain at this point whether or not there are 5 votes on the county council, and we probably will not know that until the vote is taken this Friday. Certainly want to encourage the council to basically make those contacts yourself. What we do as a staff is certainly important, but I think it's certainly much more powerful for the county council members to hear from the members of this council. If you've not done so, I would certainly encourage you to do that. And would also like to take this opportunity to thank one of our residents, Bruce Baker, who I'm sure many of you know. He was a member of the TASB committee, who took it upon himself to basically kind of organize a letter writing campaign, if you will. Got a significant number of city residents to sign that communication to the county council. I know he is still gathering signatures for anyone who is watching, and certainly not only the council, but also anyone in the community to make contact with your representative on the county council and make sure your voice is heard on this very important issue. So that concludes my report, unless there's any questions from the council.
I wonder if I could also add, in relation to the last item that you mentioned, that last week I had a telephone conversation with Valerie Irvin, and she has been, she was quite supportive of our position on the tax duplication rebate. And, you know, we're going to get her some additional information, but she is very committed to supporting us.
Yeah, I would mention that Suzanne Ludlow, who most of you, I think council certainly knows, and many people in the community do, is our community and government liaison. Suzanne, in conjunction with Fred Felton, who is the assistant city manager of Gaithersburg, are basically, on behalf of MML, trying to meet with as many of either the county council representatives or their legislative aides. She had her first meeting today, and will be continuing to have some meetings in conjunction with Mr. Felton later this week, leading up to the vote.
Yes.
Ever since I came on the council, you've had something to say about the elevators, and it's noteworthy that there's nothing to say in the elevators.
I'm going to encourage Councilmember Williams to not say anything, but I'll fill it in for him. Obviously, we had hoped that would be done at the end of December, and I probably came before this council week in and week out saying it's just around the corner, and I finally gave up, and finally the elevator is operational, so I'm thankful for that.
I wrote it today.
Yep. Is it good?
Very good. Very well.
Any other questions for the city manager? Okay. If not, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. Did you want to talk about the constant yield tax rate, or are you here as a resource?
No, I'm here to talk about the constant yield tax rate.
Okay, good.
Just to give a little background, on an annual basis, the state assessment taxation calculates the constant yield rate for the city. And this rate represents the property tax rate for the coming year that will generate the same revenue that was generated during the current tax year. When the city proposes to impose a tax rate that is higher than the constant yield rate, it must advertise the tax increase and hold a public hearing. Notice of the constant yield tax rate public hearing was published in the city newsletter in May, and also in the Gazette newspaper on April 25, 2007. In the notice, it stated that the public hearing will be held May 7, 2007. The fiscal year property tax rate, fiscal year 2007 property tax rate was 63 cents per $100 of assessed real property, and the city manager's proposed budget for fiscal 2008 assumes the real property tax rate will be 61 cents per $100 of the assessed real property. And this rate is 8.3% higher than the constant yield rate, and will generate an additional $682,965 in additional tax revenues. The real property tax rate must be set at a constant yield hearing or at a later date if announced at the hearing. The city's policy has been to adopt the tax rate as a part of the overall budget process, and an ordinance setting that tax rate will be scheduled for the adoption of the tax rate and the budget ordinance later. The purpose of this hearing today is to provide an opportunity for the public to comment on the proposed tax rate.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? Okay. Are there any public comments on the proposed tax rate, the constant yield tax rate? Related items? Are there any public comments? Okay. I think I hear Nellie saying that she would like her previous comments entered in as comments for the constant yield tax rate. Any additional comments? All right, seeing none, we will call the public hearing to a close.
Mayor Porter?
Yes.
If I may, before we move on to the next item, I think as Ms. Brooks indicated, Historically, the City Council has established the tax rate in conjunction with the other related budget ordinances. Just for the benefit of the council and for the community, I just wanted to note that that is tentatively set to have the first reading of that ordinance on June 4th and the second reading on June 11th. As Ms. Brooks mentioned, we are obligated, if the council is not setting the tax rate this evening, to provide the public with some notice of when this will come back before the council.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Terry?
Barb, I just wondered if we had received any written comments on the constant yield tax rate.
I see the city clerk shaking her head no.
Thank you.
I believe that there have been emails sent to members of the council discussing taxes in general, but I don't know of any that particularly reference the constant yield tax rate. All right, we can move on to the discussion of the proposed fiscal 08 budget. Is there an introduction to this one?
Yeah, I can just make a few comments. On April 9th, I provided the City Council and the community with an overview of my proposed budget for FY08. Just very briefly, my proposed budget calls for total expenditures of approximately $20.5 million. Of that amount, about $19.4 million are considered general fund expenditures, which are basically the day-to-day operational expenses of the city, such as law enforcement, street maintenance, things of that nature. The other two funds or fiscal entities that are part of the budget, as proposed for FY08, would be the Stormwater Management Fund and the Special Revenue Fund, which is the mechanism that the city uses to track various grant projects. The purpose of tonight's hearing is basically to provide the community with an opportunity to share your thoughts and comments on my proposed budget with the City Council before they begin their deliberations. As the Mayor mentioned, the Council will start that process later this evening. Certainly this is not the only opportunity for you to share your thoughts, but I think all of us would welcome any input from the community that we can get before we start the actual work sessions.
Additional questions? All right. Would anyone like to be heard at the hearing on the proposed fiscal 08 budget? Any comments on the fiscal 08 budget?
Yeah, I just got one request. This is Mr. Lovelace again, Maple Avenue.
Right.
Just got one request. If we could set some money aside for different peace activities throughout Tacoma Park, and maybe set some money aside for assisting the elderly in getting around, the handicapped in getting around the city. It'd be great if we could set a little bit of our money aside and be very, very careful on how we spend the money we have. You know, for example, I'd like to see us renovate that gym that they were talking about at the college, rather than spending a lot of money and building a brand new one, because, you know, especially if we don't have any programs to put in it. You know, it's different things like that. We should look into ways of saving our money rather than just, you know, having a lot of money just to toss around, because, you know, whatever it is, $20.5 million is not a lot of money when you really think about it. It's a very, very small amount for a city. But I'd like to see some money put aside, you know, for the people of our city, to help promote peace and nonviolence, help promote the end of gangs, you know, and help our law enforcement and so forth. That would be great. But we got to be very, very careful on what we spend, because we guys got to remember, a dollar can be spent only once, and then it is gone. We got to remember that. So we got to be very careful about how we decide to spend our money. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I say one thing?
Certainly.
We opened up the thing about the seniors' transportation. We just bought a bus. So this may be a sore wound to somebody here, I'm not sure. What happened with that? I mean, why hasn't there been funds for this? You should make this in the budget. I didn't see anything in there of anything like this. We have a bus. It's not earning its keep.
Well, the bus will be discussed, I believe, as part of the recreation budget. It's actually under
I don't think it's appropriately being run there. I don't think that that's where the budget should be. I think the budget and the council should take over that, and then they might oversee with you. But I don't believe the recreation should be in charge of something that is as big as that. And concerning the children and the elderly, I believe that the council should be in charge of this and have their own committee with this. That way the budget and the total transportation as to your planning would be done under the council. That way each ward would be represented even. Thank you.
I think we only have one council member who would be qualified to drive it, and Bruce hasn't volunteered. Thank you. Any other comments? Are there any other comments on the proposed fiscal '08 budget? All right, seeing none, we will close that public hearing. We are going to have, as I said at the end of the meeting, we're going to have a budget work session, which you are all welcome to stay for and observe. And we will have other opportunities for people to comment on the budget. We obviously have public comments at the beginning of every council meeting, including the ones on Thursday. And there will be public comments also at the time that we pass the final budget, both the first and the second reading. All right, the next item on the agenda is a resolution recognizing public servants. Somebody going to present that?
Sure, I can do that. This is a national program, and it's set the same week of every year. It's the first full week of the month of May, and basically it's an opportunity to recognize the work done by public employees at all levels of government, federal, state, county, and city. And the purpose of the resolution that's before you this evening would be for the council to declare the week of May 7th as Public Service Recognition Week in the city of Tacoma Park, and to encourage residents in the community to recognize the contributions made by governmental employees at all levels.
Does someone want to move the resolution?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. And I'd like to say that this also gives the council an opportunity to say thank you to our own employees who put in an enormous amount of work and who do a very good job. I think city government must be one of the most difficult jobs out there, because you get to, that was me not turning the thing on, you get to interact with all of your city residents on a day-by-day basis, and they let you know when they're happy, and they let you know when they're not happy. And it also is the kind of job that doesn't fit very easily into a 9-to-5 schedule. Every Monday evening, as we sit here conducting business as the city council, we have a number of city employees, as we do this evening, who are spending time outside of their normal workday, in addition to their normal workday, presenting information and answering questions of the council. So I want to thank all of the city employees for the wonderful job that they do, and for the dedication and the commitment they have to their jobs. Any other council comments? Any public comments on this resolution?
Yes, again, this is Mr. Loveland, and I would like to very well thank Terry Siemens for the work he has done in Ward 4, for coming around getting us the manna package over at Franklin Apartments, for coming over and helping us set up our luncheons, for being such a wonderful man in service to our city as a whole. He has shown to be the backbone of Ward 4 in Tacoma Park. Tacoma Park would not be Tacoma Park without Terry Siemens and his wife Joyce. Also, I want to also thank the rest of the council and the mayor for the work that they have done and continue to do here in Tacoma Park. Thank you very much, Terry Siemens. You're a great man. Continue on.
I think Pat's trying to get back on your good side after announcing to the world that you're 61. All right, are there any other public comments? All right, the resolution is before the council. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The resolution passes. The next item on the agenda is the first reading of an ordinance that would award a contract to an architect who would be doing the study of the renovation of the auditorium.
I don't have much to say about this in addition to our conversation last week at the work session. We just would like to move forward with this, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Well, does someone want to move the ordinance?
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. So you got a faster on that.
Much faster.
Are there any questions or comments from the council? Terry.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. Again, I appreciate the intent of turning this auditorium into a space that can be better used by the public. But tonight I'm going to have to vote against this because my number one priority for expansion of the community services within this center is for gymnasium capacity, and I think the amount of money that we're spending or proposing to spend on renovation of this space with over $28,000 for a feasibility study is exorbitant for this community. I realize that Tacoma Park is rapidly changing because of the price of homes and the turnover in the homes, and we're becoming a very wealthy community. But I'm still very hesitant to spend this kind of money on doing something that we could do for much less money. It may not have the great acoustics that I'm sure that we could do for a top dollar, but yet I don't think that the community needs great acoustics and all the other things to provide a community resource, a space that can be used by the various performing arts. So for that reason, I'm going to vote against this.
Bruce?
Just to make a point or two in reference to what Terry talked about, point out that nobody's talking about spending top dollar, and remind folks that it wasn't all that many years ago when it was almost impossible to listen to the Tacoma Park TV station because of the sound quality. There can be technical issues in the kinds of renovations that we might need to do in this room to make it usable for all different kinds of groups and also for the council. And I think we want to make sure that whatever changes that we might do, that we do them in a proper way so that we don't end up back down that path that we so recently emerged from.
And I would just like to add that I think one of the things this council has learned is that it is better to spend a little bit of money up front to make sure that you know what you're doing and everything is planned out and costed out and you know what's coming down the road than it is to find out in the middle of the project that things are not what they seemed at the beginning. So I think this is money well spent, and I think it will result in a much better product, whatever level of renovation the council decides to do, which hasn't been determined yet. Do you want to raise your hand?
Yes, I agree this is an important direction for the council to go in. I think this room being more useful to arts groups and as performance space for kids, adults, elderly, whoever would find it useful is a way that we can better serve the community, as Councilmember Siemens is intent on doing as well. And I think the gymnasium project does need to come back before the council, and we will be looking for the opportunity to further that project as well.
All right. Are there any public comments on this ordinance at first reading?
But one of the things we think about right now is, why don't we have a full house? I think there should be some questions asked. Why? We have a lovely place here already. It took a lot of years to get it like this way. It wasn't always like this, and now you want to change it. We have all this here community building. Why don't we have space already for the arts and for the different things that's supposed to be going on that you're thinking about spending all that money for? So there's some questions here I think you should ask. You should be more thinking about how to get my public in here that's supporting me and put me into office and filling up these chairs that are in this auditorium already. And the way it looks right now, I think that's where we're at. There should be more public input on all the issues that are being even covered tonight. You put it in the paper. You have not went out of your way to see any of your public. And if you have, why aren't they here? Why isn't this auditorium filled? Is this why you would think about renovating the place and making it into something more useful due to the fact that you don't get your public here? This is not funny at all, that you would think about changing the one place that you are in charge of as to your public and all of your public, that you would even think about belittling it and smaller and changing it. What you need to do is get your public back in here. Find out why they're not here and why they're not coming to these meetings. I come all the way from over on the other side.
Thank you. I think that one of the issues that that always comes up that's a trade-off is that we have made access to the council meetings available on a number of different media. People used to have to come down to this building to observe the council meetings. Now it's on the cable channel, and it's also just recently been put on streaming video on the website. And so people now have more ways to watch council meetings, and so I think that has had something to do with it. I also wanted to assure you, Nellie, that we're not trying to make it more difficult for people to observe council meetings. As we promised we would do when we renovated this building, we wanted to make every room more multi-purpose. And we have heard from a number of performers that the depth of the stage is not sufficient for them to have performances on this stage. And I think that the issue you're talking about, you know, how do we make this more useful while at the same time maintaining its utility for city council meetings, is exactly why we are having to hire someone, because that turns out to be a fairly complicated thing to do. And so that's exactly what we're talking about doing, is continuing to make this room useful for city council meetings, but at the same time making it useful for performances by expanding the depth of the stage. And that, as I say, Bruce, who spent a fair amount of time thinking about it himself and applying his own skills to it, I think where he and a number of other people ended up was that it comes out to be a fairly complicated challenge to do, and not something that may be as simple as it appears at the beginning.
And before the council takes action on this, I did just want to note that this is a two-reading ordinance because this is not currently included in the FY07 budget. As noted on both the cover sheet as well as in the ordinance itself, should the council adopt this ordinance, there would be a budget amendment submitted to you in the near future just to formalize this. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of that.
Are there any additional public comments? All right. The first reading of the ordinance is before the council. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
All right. The ordinance passes at first reading. Next, we have two ordinances coming up. One regarding, thank you, Lonnie, one regarding the preparation of the city's annual financial report, and the other for audit services.
Yvonne Brooks, the Finance Director. In the past, the city has basically had one firm to prepare the financial statements and also do the audit of the financial statements. Because there are audit services and non-audit services, the amount of non-audit work that's being done by the independent CPA firm could impair its independence. So what we decided to do for the current period is, instead of issuing one contract to one firm to do both services, is to split the services between two different firms. What we did was to send out requests for proposals for both types of services. We advertised in the Washington Post on April 11th and April 15, 2007. We mailed out proposals to firms that did audits of local governments, and basically the results of our request for proposal was that we received 2 proposals for each type of service. For the audit services, we are recommending that we retain Clifton Gunderson. This firm has basically performed successfully our audit for the last 5 years, and they also perform similar work for other local governments. Of the 2 firms that submitted proposals for the preparation of the city's comprehensive annual financial report, we recommend Lindsay and Associates, LLC. This firm has performed similar services for other local governments. The fee proposed by Clifton Gunderson for the initial year of 2007 is $30,450. And this fee is to perform the audit of the financial statements. The fee proposed by Lindsay and Associates for the preparation of the comprehensive annual financial report is $14,000. The funds for these services are being recommended to be included in the fiscal 2008 audit budget for audit services for the initial audit for fiscal 07. Therefore, recommending that you approve the two ordinances attached to give us the authorization, to give the city manager the authorization to enter into a 5-year contract with each one of these firms. After the initial year, the subsequent years will be contingent upon satisfaction with that firm's performance.
Thank you. I know there has been a change in the standards for city audits that in part led to this, but I also wanted to commend both you and the city manager for the level of professionalism that you've brought to the city's finances, and I see this as another sort of step forward in doing that, so I very much appreciate that. Does someone want to move? I think we'll take the auditing services first. Is that your intention, Ms. Brooks?
The audit service, fine.
Okay.
That's good.
All right, does someone want to move the ordinance? Moved. Someone want to second it?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is that, I saw Terry's hand up, is that the one you wanted to speak to?
But I really want to speak to both of them, and
Okay.
And I'll just repeat it the second time if necessary. First of all, as I understand it, the city auditor and the financial report is basically reports to the council and not to staff. Is that correct? Similar to the city attorney.
Well, obviously, they're not an employee, contractual otherwise, but you are retaining a firm, and basically, as you know, I think it's generally every November, the audit firm basically presents its report to the council. That's correct. Their ultimate obligation is to you.
It is to the council. Excuse me. And I guess the point I would like to make is that I'm not sure I have seen the exact bids for both of these organizations, but I would like to see the two organizations switched in their responsibility because I was disappointed with Clifton Gunderson during their presentation to this council last year. I raised questions about the auditing of the seized property within our police department, and at that time was told that by their representative that they would get back to me to understand better what my questions were and to see how they might be able to address that situation. They didn't get back to me. In December, I called the Clifton Gunderson office to talk with the representative, and again provided some more detail. He left it that he would look into it and then discuss it with the city manager and then get back to me, and again he did not get back to me. And I feel that if they are an auditor who is basically auditing the books of the city to give confidence to this council and to the community on the viability of our financial accounting, that they should be more responsive to the city council, and regardless of what the answer is, they could at least get back to a council member when they've committed to do so. And so I would like to see these two organizations switched in their responsibility for this coming year, with Clifton Gunderson doing the annual financial report, however, a new firm doing the audit services.
Clifton Gunderson did not bid on the preparation of the comprehensive annual financial report.
Well, then I guess my suggestion would be...
And Lindsay and Associates did not bid on the audit.
Then I would say that we would pick a different organizations for both of those. people who did bid on it or recompete the contracts.
Well, I would agree with Terry that responding to an individual question is an important thing. However, I don't think it's the most important thing that our auditor does. And I think this auditor has done an extremely good job in terms of their audits of the city's financial reports for a number of years. And I'm not willing to go to a different auditor because of a failure to return a phone call.
Mayor, if I may, it's my understanding from Mr. Novak that he and Councilmember Siemens actually did speak, and that Mr. Novak explained kind of the process and the level of review that they do in terms of their general review of control. So I guess I must confess, Councilmember Siemens, I'm rather puzzled because Mr. Novak indicated that two of you did speak. There appeared to be a question whether there was some follow-up information that you expected to receive. When, as I indicated in the email I sent to the council on Friday, I did have that discussion with Mr. Novak when he was here to interview with Ms. Brooks and I regarding the possible continuation of their contract. He indicated there was something that you were still awaiting. He was unaware of what that was, and that if there was something you were expecting, he'd be more than happy to provide it, but he thought he had answered your questions to the best of his ability. So,
well, he did not contact me. I contacted him in December because he had not contacted me after committing to do so at this council meeting, at our council meeting on the audit. And at that time, he said that he was unable to comment on what they might be able to do with the information that had been collected, or if there was some way to easily collect additional information, that he would speak with his colleague, who was actually the woman who was also at this council meeting when she returned to the office, and that was the last the conversation I've had with him. And he had indicated that after speaking with her, he was going to get back to me, and he did not.
Bruce?
If I can just go to a different point on this. My sense is that there's an opportunity cost involved with splitting these two services, since the budgeted amount appears to be less than the total of the two. I'm wondering if that is in fact the case, and that I think it's a good thing to split them, but I'm just wondering, is it your sense that necessarily the cost was a little bit less when the same firm was providing both services?
Ms. Brooks can help me out here if I misspeak, because certainly she's a former auditor and she's a CPA. I'm not.
But you play one on TV.
I pretend to be one.
Well, we were kind of expecting an increase in costs, and we were told that because of the various standards that have been recently issued that will be implemented during the period of this audit contract, that we could expect an increase in fees no matter which firm did the work, because the documentation requirements have increased.
So your sense is that the increase is due more to GASB rather than to the splitting of the services?
The statement of audit and standards.
Yeah, there has not just the, I think the one the council has typically talked about was GASB 34, which was a kind of an infrastructure, I'm sorry, 45. There's been a variety of changes in accounting standards, but I think as Ms. Brooks alluded to, and if you've ever sat in an interview, no offense, Ms. Brooks, with a bunch of CPAs starting to rattle off various accounting standards, some of it was over my head, but when I was preparing my proposed budget, I think Ms. Brooks was very clear during my discussions with her that we were going to see a significant increase because of the level of scrutiny that these auditing standards would require of any firm. I think certainly Ms. Brooks was very proactive that even before some of those standards catch up, that I think we all believe that probably eventually there will be some requirement that these be done totally independently. I don't think we're quite there yet, but in talking to both firms, they certainly indicated that they thought that was going to be sort of the wave of the future, just to maintain that level of independence. I would ask Ms. Brooks to comment just on the other two firms that did submit bids. There was a very, very significant cost difference between the quotes submitted by, I believe it was Burt Smith. Is that correct, Ms. Brooks?
Yeah, the other
on
firm
both proposals.
The other firm that submitted a proposal for the audit was Burt Smith in Washington, D.C., and his bid for the 2007 audit was $46,280 as compared to $30,450.
I'm familiar with Bert Smith. They're the auditors for COG.
Right. Ms. Burns, could you also comment on the other one, because there was
Yeah.
quite a significant difference?
Bert Smith also bid on the preparation of the financial statements. His bid for fiscal year 2007 was $87,475.
87,000?
Compared to 14,000.
And if I could just say that I'm familiar with the bandying about of various auditing standards and things. My father was a CPA and an auditor.
Yeah, obviously, as Ms. Brooks and I looked at certainly the disparity on the work related to the comprehensive annual financial report, there was a huge disparity, and we were trying to figure out why. I think her analysis, and it makes sense to me, was that the other firm basically is used to auditing some extremely large entities, not auditing, I'm sorry, preparing financial statements. Probably the volume of the records and the complexity of their accounting structure may be vastly different, but where it came down to was not as much the rates per se, but the amount of hours that they estimated it would take to actually do the work. The other thing, I think, just in relation to the general cost, and talking to both firms, I guess there's been some changes over the years, perhaps, in terms of the type of requirements in order to get your CPA license in the state of Maryland. It's kind of a matter of supply and demand, and they were indicating that their cost for actually hiring entry-level CPAs had gone up dramatically over the years. So I think it's a function of both the change in auditing standards and the amount of time, and some of it just the labor market for actually hiring CPAs.
But I guess back to my original question, is your sense that given all of these good reasons to split it and reasons for costs to go up, that it necessarily increases the cost to have the two separate companies doing it, where there were economies of scale that were maybe not in our best financial oversight interests, that made it cheaper to do everything by one firm?
Ms. Birch, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had that conversation with Clifton Gunderson, since they were the firm that actually had some experience with the city. Obviously, we elected as a staff to bid both components separately. My sense from the conversation, and certainly Ms. Brooks can correct me if I'm not recalling it correctly, is that there may have been some minimal additional cost, but there was a question as to whether or not, if the same firm was performing both functions under these new standards, whether that might be noted as some type of deficiency. I don't remember what the technical term was, but...
But Clifton Gunderson also said if they had done both the audit and the preparation, that the fee would be substantially more than the $30,000.
Okay.
But what the city manager is referring to, there's been some discussion that if a firm has prepared an organization's financial statement, that may result in management letter comments as reference to the organization not having adequate internal control over its financial reporting function.
Okay, good.
So
we don't need those.
That was another issue, and the CPA firms are the standards basically have separated services between audit services and non-audit services, and once the CPA gets beyond a certain point with the non-audit services, where in essence they're performing management functions, it does impair their independence, right. And it's they can't get to the point of actually generating routine adjusting audit entries without impairing their independence and being considered being performing management decisions and making estimates for management.
I know this whole issue has caused some of the large accounting firms to split off part of their business so that they could do different pieces.
Yeah, it seems like it's going to be a trend in the future that certain firms will specialize in preparing the financial statements while other firms will specialize in performing the audits.
Okay, thanks.
Any other council comments or questions? Terry?
Thank you, Mayor Porter. I did want to take this opportunity to thank you and congratulate you for the award that we've received, the city received for our excellent financial accounting. It's a marked difference between where we were before you joined the city and where we are now, and I certainly appreciate that. And I give you a lot of credit for turning the perception of our accounting and the quality of the accounting in this city around. I really appreciate that.
I thank you very much. And my hope is that by using the two different firms, it would provide a better quality product and a more timely one.
Thank you. Mayor Porter, I'm a little fuzzy on what is it we're about to vote on. Is it both?
No, it would be the first one only. I think we have to do them separately. There's separate ordinance.
So this is the one for the auditing?
Yes, this is the one for the auditing services.
All right, thank you.
Is anyone else unclear about that? I think it has been moved, right? Yes. It's been moved and seconded, so it is before the council. Are there any additional council comments or questions? Are there any public comments on this first reading ordinance, or the first reading of this ordinance? All right, seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
All right, the ordinance passes at first reading. We're now dealing with the second of the two ordinances, which is the ordinance authorizing the contract for the preparation of the city's financial report.
I'd like to move it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any council comments or questions? Are there any public comments? All right, seeing none. Again, this is the first reading of the ordinance. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That ordinance also passes at first reading. So I think we've got both of those. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the next one is the ordinance authorizing the contract for services for the neighborhood traffic study. Studies in the plural.
I'd like to move the ordinance.
Okay. Second. It's moved and seconded. We have talked about this one. I don't know what you're passing out. Do you want to introduce or say anything particular?
Sure. 2 weeks ago, we brought for you, before a work session, the proposals that we've received in request for proposals for a neighborhood traffic calming study. And I provided you with some additional information that you had asked for regarding the proposals that we had received. We did go through the proposals, and fortunately, the committee that was looking at the proposals was in agreement of which proposals were the most responsive. We did go ahead and interview two of these firms, the Wallace Montgomery Associate proposal and the Vaness Hengen Bruceland, or VHB, proposal. And after discussing these responses, we decided that the Wallace Montgomery Associates proposal was probably was the most responsive and the one that we would recommend that the city sign a contract with.
Okay. It also is the lowest price one. It's nice when that happens.
They did their homework and they had gone through the council agendas and knew how much was budgeted for the project. It was somewhat impressive.
Okay. Would someone like to move it?
It's been.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. That's right. I do remember it was moved. Colleen moved it. And this is a single reading ordinance because the money has already been put in the budget. Are there any council comments or questions? Joy?
I continue to be surprised that the Tacoma Junction is not on here, but it's possible that SHA is funding the study of the potential solutions at the junction. Is that right?
Yes, I actually received a call last week from the firm that's looking at the junction area. They asked me for some background information, and they expect that the report will be done in a few weeks. Now, that was what they said the last time around, so, but we do know that they are looking at it.
What firm is it?
It was Kittleson and Associates.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments, questions? We did have a discussion of this. Are there any public comments on this ordinance? Single reading ordinance for traffic studies.
Star
Okay?
for Pinecrest, as well as the others.
If provided with authorization, we would go to contract as soon as possible. So hopefully, we would like to hold meetings with the neighborhoods next week, if possible.
Okay. So it would be fairly quick. The ordinance is effective upon adoption, which, assuming it's adopted, would be this evening. So you can move immediately. All right, any other comments on this ordinance? All right, since this is a single reading ordinance, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Porter?
Aye.
Councilmember Austin Lane? Aye. Councilmember Barry?
Aye.
Councilmember Clay?
Aye.
Councilmember Siemens?
Aye.
Councilmember Sniffer?
Aye.
Councilmember Williams?
Aye.
This ordinance passes, the single reading ordinance passes. Thank you, Alana. The council will take a short break and come back for our work session items.
What do I get for that? I could make some money. If I get a raise, I'd be happy. At the moment, though, I think you're way ahead of me.
Want to be able to see it.
Yes.
Good evening, Mayor Porter and council members. I'm Laurie Kelly. I'm chair of the Safe Roadways Committee. And for the benefit of residents, we advise the city on transportation issues, including pedestrians, bicycles, traffic, and transit. Okay. The Safe Roadways Committee currently is made up of volunteer members, including Vice Chairs Catherine Kelly, Bob Patton, members Greg Castana, who's with me now, he's the former chair, Sanjay Grover, Jay Lee, Wolfgang Mergner, Dan Turner, Jay Ohlfelder, and Margaret Warner. Okay, the council members should have a copy of the new priorities, recommended priorities for the City of Tacoma Park FY08 budget. There have been some additions since the last priorities we had, which came out in '06. And I'd just like to go through the additions. Okay, first of all, under pedestrian path improvements, maintain and upgrade heavily used pedestrian paths, repair the Maple Avenue Bridge across Sligo Creek. Okay. Under public outreach events or programs, use media to disseminate information to city residents promoting safe walking, driving, and biking, and the use of public transportation. For improved transit accessibility, for buses specifically, create standards and guidance for amenities to be located at ride-on and Metrobus stops, such as site selection, seating, shelter types, trash receptacles, pedestrian crossings, bike parking, and provision of bus schedule and route information. Implement these standards and guidance through future bus stop improvement and maintenance contracts. Okay, second, determine accessibility and safety for child pedestrians using school bus stops. Okay, under enhanced bike facilities, examine feasibility, costs, and benefits of a bicycle sharing program in Tacoma Park, and this is meant especially for commuters. Continue to install additional bicycle facilities throughout the city, for example, bike racks. Okay, under create a sidewalk policy, sponsor consultant-led community workshops to develop a city sidewalk ordinance. All right, next we have Brad Castano. He's going to take over.
Thanks, Lori. Now, these committee priorities are like a living document that we've had since we started on this committee, and both Lori and I have been with it since its inception in 2004. So Lori just reviewed some of the current modifications that we've made, and these are generally the 5-6 priorities that we, when we come to council and when we kind of think about projects we want to be working on or recommending to you all, we try to keep them within these, I guess it's kind of like a template or a blueprint. So we were asked to give an update on how we spent money in past fiscal years, as well as give some direction as to how we're planning to spend money in the future. So we thought we'd go back to the beginning and just kind of do a quick overview of dollars that we have spent in past fiscal years. So in fiscal year 05 and 06, we did at this point in time, we were actually targeting projects that we knew that were small projects that we potentially could complete, because there's no end to the very, very large projects that we can have a little piece in. So a few projects that we did back in those 05, 06 fiscal year, we worked on the installation of bike racks throughout the city. And there's a photo down in the lower right there of one of those bike racks. Bike sharrows on Maple Avenue, and that's a share arrow. It's like a bicycle with a little, I'm going to forget what it's called, these little upside down things. Chevron. And that actually isn't on Maple Avenue yet, but we already spent the dollars, and they are going to be going out very shortly, David tells us. Another project that we did, this was probably in 06, was, and these are all with the help of David Souls and the very, very helpful staff of community planning, housing and community planning, or whatever. We did these ride-on bus information holders, and there's actually a photo on this slide. You can see right there a little tube, and it was consistent with the improved transit accessibility priority, and I think we have 10 or 20. 10 right now are out in various locations throughout the city, and actually we're planning to spend a little bit more in this fiscal year on having more of those put out. Another thing, in addition to these kind of small projects, we've also done a variety of advocacy efforts since our inception, advocating for traffic safety, transportation safety. And here's just a short list of some of those things. Lori participates on a multi-jurisdictional committee working on the Tacoma Langley Bus Transit Center, and we're excited about that moving forward. We participated in a public forum that Mayor Porter spearheaded. I think that was 06, fiscal year 06. We've also advocated in letters and things like that to our various local representatives for speed cameras. Montgomery County, we're excited that that's moving forward right now. We've also made various recommendations via reports and other presentations regarding safety improvements on Piney Branch Road, specifically at the intersection of Piney Branch and 410. Comprehensive improvements on Philadelphia Avenue from, I believe, Carroll up to Tacoma Avenue, and pedestrian improvements to the New Hampshire Avenue Gateway. So that's 0506. Oh, our picture turned sideways. So FY07 fiscal year we're currently in, just closing up, we're focusing most of our efforts, $10,000, on community outreach. And at this point, we're going to have the city newsletter, a pedestrian safety insert, that is. And we're also putting together, or have put together, an insert for the Tacoma Survival Guide that's going to have transit information, and I think some driving safety information too, safe driving information. And then we're also just spending a little bit more of the money from FY07 on putting more of those bus information signs out, those ride-on bus information signs. And that newsletter was nicely positioned until it turned sideways, but you get the idea. And so for this upcoming fiscal year, we do have some recommendations. We see in the work session that we're asking for $10,000, and the primary focus of those dollars is to do more work on safe roadways, communication, and outreach. And we have a variety of ideas floating about as far as what we might be doing with that. There are a couple kind of small projects that we just thought we would put on here that we know are potential things that can get a little bit more attention, and one of those is this Maple Avenue Bridge. It unfortunately has just been a really bad state right now, and hopefully someone doesn't get hurt before something happens to fix it. Along along with our advocacy efforts, we continue to advocate for safe routes to school, and I know David's going to talk a little bit more about that in the next session. And then we also just continue to advocate for comprehensive multimodal improvements. That means, not just improvements for cars, but for pedestrians and cyclists and anybody else who might want to share a road to the Maryland State Highway routes. And some examples are Tacoma Junction, and it's always nice to hear you guys talking here about Tacoma Junction because it is, unfortunately, a very difficult area, as well as New Hampshire Avenue. And, just to have a short just explanation about multimodal improvements, unfortunately, a lot of our roads are State Highway is making decisions about what we do to our roads, and these are roads that pretty much define our community, and they aren't just about cars. They should be about pedestrians and cyclists and anybody else who wants to use them. And a lot of those two areas right there are not really very safe for our pedestrians. So I'll come down off of my soapbox and thank you all for letting us have a few moments with you this evening. And also want to thank particularly David Souls for being a very, very strong advocate and leader for our committee. So if anybody has any questions, we're more than happy to answer them.
Well, thank you all very much for your report and for your continued advocacy for pedestrians and bicyclists and, other people who need to be sharing the roads with cars. Very much appreciate that. I guess I very much agree with you on the Maple Avenue Bridge. I think, I do use that, and I noticed the bridge, it looks like it's running into some fairly severe problems. And I wonder if the city manager might have sort of an update on where we are with the Maple Avenue, the bridge from the pedestrian piece of the bridge that goes across Sligo Creek Parkway and with Maple Avenue. Do you know where we are with that? Because I know I asked about it some time ago, and you said that the city engineer was trying to find a firm that could actually even do the repair, and I know you've been...
Yes, I apologize. I don't have an update since I think, Mayor, the last time you and I spoke. I will touch base with the Public Works Director, and we'll get some information out to the council later this week.
Okay, but because I would agree with you. I think that is fairly important. It looks, I'm not an engineer, but it looks kind of nerve-wracking when you're walking across it. It makes funny squeaking noises like the next step you're going to be in the creek. So.
My dog's afraid to walk over it.
Well, maybe smarter than the rest of us, yeah.
We also understand that the bridge itself for cars might be unsafe too. So might want to look into that.
I don't know if we're...
Who owns the bridge?
It
Who's responsible for the maintenance of the bridge?
We are. Maple Avenue is ours.
Yeah,
Even though it's crossing the parkway?
Yes.
Yeah,
I would note, based on my last discussion with the Public Works Director, I'm not aware of any structural problems. I don't want anyone to get too nervous, but it certainly does require some work. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing that I was interested in is we put down two crosswalks on Maple Avenue, at the other end of Maple Avenue. And I don't know, I would be interested in hearing, not right now from the city manager, as to what our experience has been with those, because they are fairly expensive, because rather than painting them on, they get sort of like burned into the road or whatever. But they seem to have held up fairly well, and they're extremely visible. And they do seem to invite pedestrians to use them because they look, they're they look like a crosswalk. And I would also be interested in if we've got any more information on that, about any report back from Public Works on those, because I think they look like they're holding up well, and I'd also be interested in whether that might be something that, I know they're expensive, but they may be a useful thing to do. Oh, and then the last thing I was going to ask you all about, I've been talking about sidewalks for years and years and years, and the problem we always run into is money. There's a lot of neighborhoods, particularly on the eastern side of the city, that don't have sidewalks at all. And when the council has tried to think about that issue, it's always been a question of where we could find money to do extensive sidewalks. I wondered if you all had any thoughts, whether you had looked into that, whether we could find some money that we could use to expand sidewalks throughout the city. Have you all looked at that? Could I ask you to?
It's definitely something we could discuss at a future meeting. We've had lots of talks about this, having some type of a sidewalk policy, but it definitely has kind of had fits and starts as far as getting anything accomplished on it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. I don't want to put ourselves in the position, though, of saying to people, here's a great sidewalk policy, we'll do sidewalks under X, Y, and Z,
Right.
but of course we can't do any sidewalks right now because we don't have the money. Don't want to create false hopes about what we can do.
Committee right now who's discussing some aspects.
How it would work, how a sidewalk inventory would work.
Okay.
Yeah. At the dialogue last May, I remember you did mention that neighborhood associations could get together and
Well, they
get some
can
sort
pay
of
for them.
loan to pay for the sidewalks.
Well, if right now, if people want to pay for sidewalks, they can do that, and they can do like a tax provision where, thank you, special assessment for sidewalks. They can do that now. That hasn't been a real popular idea, and so a lot of neighborhoods still don't have sidewalks. But, if you could just think about that, too, and I very much appreciate the work that you all do. Thank you.
Thank
Are there
you.
other questions? I saw Bruce, and then I saw Joy Christopher closest, and I said, I see Maria.
The question I have is on the recommended priorities for '08. Under the first item, multimodal route enhancements, and talk about identified priority state routes include, and the one that I don't see on there is Carroll Avenue. I see Philadelphia, Carroll, Ethan Allen, 410, but that's only that little one block piece of Carroll. And I'm thinking about particularly the...
It's all put together here. Yeah, you're right, that should be a separate avenue.
Those are separate pieces.
Yes, and we should have caught that because we have a map where the state routes are highlighted and that they didn't highlight Carroll. So maybe because they were looking at this list.
Because we definitely...
Yeah, we will. We'll take care of that.
We definitely need to look at Carroll because I know that there are a number of people who are always concerned about pedestrian safety getting across Carroll. One particular concern is up at the top of my block at Lincoln, and people are very concerned about ways to get across there and having the state come up with some ways of slowing the traffic down, particularly coming up that hill and getting pedestrians safely across to the bus stops and kids to the school bus stops as well. So it fits in a whole bunch of categories, and I know it's a large concern for a great number of people.
All right, thank you.
I, too, want to thank you for your work. I really appreciate that the committee continues to meet and think about these recommendations to bring to the council. I'm glad that the Tacoma Junction area is also one that you are focused on, and I hope that as the state highway comes back to the city with information or possibly doesn't come back to the city with information, that your group can make sure that that it remains top of the list. And I'm assuming, Bruce, that when you were talking about Carroll Avenue, that it included the Westmoreland?
Yes.
Okay, very good. The one question I had is about the DC signs for bikes that I've started seeing. They're orange and kind of nice contemporary design. Is that something that is, well, you may not know. I don't. Is it something that they're using to mark bike paths or just to increase accessibility? I've seen one over by CVS, and I can't remember where the other one was, but they're quite nice. And
Where are the signs? Are they up on a...
They're kind of like the way the ride-on signs now have that little bubble. They're like that. They, have a colorful post, and then they have information attached to post.
Is that on a bike route?
That's what I don't know, but,
All right. We'll have to look for that. You said it's near the CVS?
yeah, there's one on Willow Street near the CVS.
There's definitely, we're right now asking for $10,000 for community outreach education, and that would definitely fall into that realm if we choose, to move forward with something like that.
Right, and while I appreciate education efforts, sometimes they either fall on deaf ears or, they're done and then they're over. I would love to see increased attractive signage. So if a good portion of that money is spent on attractive signage, I would love that.
I too echo my fellow council members' comments about appreciating the report and all the work you guys have been doing. I do have a concern that I heard when I was out campaigning and continue to hear as someone who's ridden the bus for the entire time I've been in Washington. And I've always been disappointed in the ride-on service. You guys are focusing on accessibility. I actually think that some significant effort should be devoted to improving the service itself. This includes, in particular, the sort of repair of the buses. The condition and state of the ride-on buses, particularly the small ones, is pretty abysmal. And from my talking to folks in other parts of the county, there also appears to be a down-county syndrome that we appear to get the older buses, the new buses go up to the up-county part. And I know that the county contracts out bus service, the ride-on bus service, and so it's a bit difficult. Contracting out is a great vehicle for escaping accountability, and I think it really requires a lot of vigilance on the part of the citizenry, and your committee could actually do a fair amount of work. There's also interest, Mark Elrich and I talked about, this isn't the time to propose this, but it's an idea who I hope the time comes when it will be, which is to make the ride-on bus service free, that it doesn't actually cost that much money to do that, but of course the county would have to come up with it. But mostly what I heard when I was out campaigning was improvements to the services, the physical service itself. There's always, of course, complaints about buses missing entirely their time, and you have to wait another half an hour before another bus comes, particularly in the middle of the day. But the most common complaint I heard was you grab onto a bar to hold on as the bus lurches around the streets, particularly Maple Avenue, and the bar goes all the way over, or the windows don't open, or the air conditioning doesn't work, or the seats are falling apart, or some similar, really quite egregious. And I've seen many of these things myself over the years. So I do encourage you to branch out from just accessibility to also include improvements in the service itself.
We do have a contact at Ride-On that, we've been working with on getting the Ride-On bus information holders, and we can definitely talk to him about that. And also, wasn't there someone on the committee that said there's been some new buses purchased that are a different color, the Ride-On buses?
It's true. I've been working with Jay Lee and Councilmember Leventhal on issues related to Ride-On that go down Carroll Avenue. And what Ruben says is exactly right. The disrepair that the old buses have fallen into is really being noticed by our residents. So I also understand from Councilmember Leventhal that they are going to end the practice of contracting out. So it's possible that they've found it's more cost-effective, which I would believe, to do a lot of those functions in-house. And hopefully we will see better service. But I think just in general, buses, if they don't run more frequently, there's a certain sector of the population who just wouldn't consider using them. So I'd really like to see increased bus service. And I think that accessibility is very important, and what you're focused on helps augment the accessibility, and so thank you.
In comment to what Ruben had to say, when I was in San Francisco, we did a study that looked at what it would take to do free buses, and it actually wasn't that expensive. It was a 20-cent per square foot tax on residential property and 10 cents on business property, which, if you calculate it out, per square footage for the people who would live in that, is much cheaper than what happens now. And they looked at the costs of savings on the fare boxes, and they looked at the increase in safety because bus drivers would no longer have to be monitoring who paid. They can open up all the doors and let people on and off. And the major stumbling block was actually the federal government, because the federal government pays the transportation subsidy by a mechanism that is based on fare box revenues. So as soon as you eliminated your fare box revenues, you eliminated the federal subsidy. So maybe since we're so close to Washington, D.C., we could convince them to allow us to become some kind of a test pilot group. But I think that that's a great idea, and I think it would really help us with a lot of the issues that we have with people having access to jobs and with clean air. And I mean, it's just a whole host of things that I think that would be a good benefit to me. Maybe somebody from HHS could convince DOT to do that. Thank you so much for your report, especially for the comments on the sidewalk policy. I know I live in an area that doesn't have a lot of sidewalks, and that's really important to people, particularly to parents with young kids.
Yeah.
And I think we should do whatever we can to get sidewalks in the city, and I would encourage you to continue to explore that and find mechanisms for including that. One of the things that I think is a barrier to people now is that we say, well, you could do this special assessment district, but a lot of people don't even know what a special assessment district is, and they don't have any sense of how much it costs. So maybe we could promote a news story for a sense of how much would it cost for an average, per average home, and then if you capitalize that over 5 years or 10 years, whatever it is they do, what would really be the cost on average to a homeowner? I mean, I imagine most of the lots have, I think my lot has.
That might be something good to put in the city newsletter or something.
Yeah, it would give people a sense of, what it is that we're really talking about. And I had gotten one figure from the Public Works Director of $30 a linear foot, but then the next time I talked to her, I found out that included the curbs and gutters, and that if you're just doing the sidewalks, it's actually significantly cheaper than I had imagined. And the other thing I wanted to say is that I was at the American Planning Association conference, and someone was there that was a Canadian company, but they make lights for sidewalk to bring attention to the fact that there are people actually in the intersection, and a lot of them are solar powered, and they have the flashing lights in different colors and the signs and all that kind of thing. And I think that's something worth pursuing, especially on our state highway routes in areas where there's just a real lack of visibility, and it's hard to get people to stop because the flashing lights that say pedestrian, I think, are at least greater than the painted crossbar in the sidewalk. And the last thing I would say about that is that I just recently tried to talk to the Public Works Director about getting crossbars painted within the 2 white lines for the sidewalks that are on the state highways, and she said that they won't do that. And that just seems outrageous to me, because the crossbars make it visible in a way that just the 2 white lines.
Yeah, they call it zebra striping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that would
That's what makes it visible.
That's what makes it visible.
As I mentioned before, State Highways has incredible control over these roads in our city, and it's really, having been trying to do this for 3 years, it's incredibly frustrating. And there's no magic bullet to get these things done. Discussions of interesting crossings, safer crossings. It's just not easy. we're talking dollar values that are beyond what our committee has. So it has to be some type of a joint thing with Public Works in the city also, and just juggling all the players in these situations.
Well, one good thing that came out of that that public dialogue, the public workshop last May, was it was a catalyst for neighborhood associations working directly with the SHA representative. I was in on a lot of emails that went back and forth, and used to be Stephanie Yanovitz, who's been replaced, but she actually went around to neighborhoods and dealt with getting improvements directly. So sometimes the neighborhood associations can do more than the committee. So.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. And thanks to both of you and to the committee. I think, looking back at the years that the committee has been in place, it's incredible to think about the amount of work that you have done, and I appreciate the longevity that both of you have put into this project. And I think anybody listening to this discussion tonight has got to have an appreciation of the wide variety of topics that you have to deal with and the difficulty you must face in trying to sort all that stuff out and prioritize it, because you can't do everything for everybody.
Yeah. We enjoy it because we know it's important.
I just wanted to voice the Ward 4's appreciation for the work that has been reflected in some of the improvements here in Ward 4. Certainly the crosswalks along Maple Avenue using the thermoplast, I think it's called, material instead of painted crosswalks. Those are fantastic. Next best thing, I guess, to zebra stripes. We've got little squares instead.
Man, they're attractive, aren't they?
They're attractive, and they're permanent.
Looks like brick, almost
yeah.
like brick.
They're actually more visible, I think, than the stripes because of the material they're made of.
Right.
Yeah.
And we look forward with the recent resurfacing of Maple Avenue to seeing the thermoplast being used for the new crosswalks that go in. We're hopeful that's going to be implemented. I also have noticed in Ward 4, and my constituents have already commented on the ride-on signs that have been installed. It's helpful information. It's I won't say attractive, but it's not distractive anyways, and it provides information that's valuable to the people in our ward, who are many of whom are very dependent on public transportation. And so thank you for your efforts to bring that to our neighborhood. I look forward to seeing the sharrows on the new road surface. But I encourage you to work with our staff, including David Sulls, because the city has also approved, this council has also approved some discussion of streetscaping and maybe some realignments of things that we don't want to do work that's going to be replaced in some way later. So we need to just coordinate that. I had a young man from the neighborhood, Yared Tababu, I believe his name is, that stopped in and brought to this council's attention his concerns about the bridge across the parkway and the disrepair and how difficult it is for pedestrians and unsafe it is for pedestrians. And so I hope that I appreciate your, again, bringing that to the council. I hope that we'll be able to discuss that some as we discuss our budget this year. It's again an important issue for Ward 4 residents, because so many of them are dependent on either public transportation or their feet, and many of them use the facility at Columbia Union College and the hospital, and so they use that route frequently, and it's important that we keep it safe. I appreciate the discussions that have gone on tonight from my colleagues about the ride-on service, and I think it's not just a matter of the quality of the service and maybe some free transportation for people. And I encourage you to talk with the management of Ride-On about both of those subjects, and maybe even discussions about the addition of additional routes within our city. But I think one of the things that I would like to see your committee discuss is there a way you can kind of push to another level of alternative transportation? You know, you spend a lot of time on pedestrian and on bicycle. And is there something we can do as a city to encourage more people, at least for their local transportation needs, to depend and to use the public transportation? And that might be not just the bus service, but also taxi service and other alternatives that that take the place of car ownership. And I think the zip cars and other vendors such as those maybe figure into the equation. So at some point, I know you have a busy schedule and a lot of things on the plate, but that's something I'd like you to consider. And along that line, the one that I think would be kind of maybe easy, if I can say that. I don't, it's probably not, but you know, the city just recently purchased a bus, and we certainly had designs for that bus to use it to bring people to this community center to help make sure that everyone in the city is able to benefit from this facility. But I also wonder if there isn't some use that could be made of that bus to provide transportation to some of our local business centers from some of the high-density residential areas. And that's an area where I think that maybe the committee could make some recommendations that might really be, as I said, easy.
What is the name of the, it's a shuttle bus?
This is a bus that the city purchased.
Does it have a name?
It has, no, city bus.
City bus.
It has no name yet. And that might be another task you take on,
Okay,
name the
good.
bus. Right?
Just for the record. All right, city bus. Thank you.
Well, now that we've assigned you twice as much responsibility as you walked into this room with, I very much do appreciate that you have done so much around the original responsibilities that we gave you for pedestrian safety and accessibility and bikes and those kinds of things. And, you know, I appreciate all the comments that my colleagues have made, and I just, perhaps my colleagues can sort of realize that these guys are volunteers, and they're putting in a huge amount of time already, and we're so delighted with the job that they've done that we're loading all these additional requests on them. And
in that case, just let David do it.
Yeah, we do. He does a lot.
So I appreciate the work that you've done. I appreciate the thoughtfulness, and I appreciate your consistency in bringing things to us from year to year. Actually, I had one additional question that I meant to ask you and forgot. Have you gotten any feedback, or maybe has anyone else gotten any feedback on the bus route information holders? I mean, that was helpful to hear from Terry that his constituents appreciate it.
David?
Has there been any formal feedback on that?
Yes, David has information on that.
We have not gathered any formal feedback, but just a lot of people saying they like it a lot.
Okay. Well, informal works. So, okay,
We were
appreciate
really
that.
impressed by the circulator bus in downtown. That's kind of where the original idea came from.
Right.
And just to kind of have something in Tacoma Park that's a little more modern looking. And
Right.
I know it was put out to my friends, and I think they're pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Okay. Is there anything else? Well, thank you all very much. We appreciate this. And, you know, we will continue to take a look at these things and see if we can work some of them very specifically into the budget. So I
Great.
appreciate
That's
your
great.
comments and your recommendations. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you very much.
And as long as you're sitting there, David, I think you're up
Yeah.
next, aren't you?
I was going to run away.
Thank you both very much. Yes.
Hi, so I'm David Sells, Associate Planner with the city. Staff is putting together an application for the second year's Safe Routes to School grant. Safe Routes to School grant is a federal grant. It's administered by the SHA. And the purpose of it is to get more children to walk and bike to and from school and to improve the safety of them doing so.
Application is due May 18th. We've been putting together the proposal based on community workshops that we held in April of this year, so a few weeks ago. There are 3 parts to the proposal. The first part is to continue our first-year program, which we recently got funded for, and that's basically education and encouragement activities with 7 participating schools in the area. Second part is to reapply for the one piece that we didn't get, and that's a sidewalk on Piney Branch Road between Philadelphia and Grant. And that the third part of the proposal is, or the application, is to, what the mayor was talking about, finding money for sidewalks, is that we'd like to hold a citywide missing sidewalk survey or study and have that accompanied by installation money to put in a number of sidewalks. So the Safe Routes to School grant there are 3 cycles. This is the second one. I mentioned applications due May 18th. It's on the top of my mind. This one, all 3 cycles will run from now until September 2010. This cycle, there's $3.6 million for the state of Maryland. Do you have any questions?
I was just going to very quickly ask if, I assume that your number 3 item is also coordinated with the committee's discussion. I assume that those are 2 sides of the same thing?
Definitely.
Okay.
We've been working hand in hand. Well, I've been working with the committee.
Right.
They've helped out a lot.
And so when you're talking about community workshops, they would be part of the outreach that the Safe Roadways Committee is doing. It's not 2 separate efforts.
Right. The Safe Roadways Committee would be part of these workshops.
Okay. Good. Thank you. As he said verbally Philadelphia and Grant.
All right.
Yeah, I have a typo there. I'm sorry.
That's no problem. I appreciate that you're continuing to put forward that what I know is a big ticket item, but it's so important. And honestly, if the city doesn't get assistance in funding it, we'll be where we have been for the last 6 years that I've been on the council. Very frustrated in our attempts. So I can't stress how important it is to kind of complete the loop around the neighborhood where the school is, and that one is adjacent to the school. So anyone who's coming from that block or from farther down Piney Branch really has few options for a safe route. And the number 3 item, I hope will take a look at Birch Avenue, where I know there's 2 blocks of Birch that do not have sidewalks, and we approached the issue, I can't remember how long, I think it was in 2003, and it was a thorny one for the residents who lived right there. But then I've been hearing about it ever since from people who don't live right there but who need that sidewalk to be in place. So I hope that that area of Birch can get attention, as they have, I think that neighborhood would support close attention to some solution for those 2 blocks. And yeah, thank you very much for kind of keeping track of this funding stream. It's a very important one.
Any other comments? So we will see you then next week with the resolution of support.
Yes.
I'm assuming the council is interested in moving forward with this.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. No money is free, as we've discovered. So we are now moving to our first budget work session item, which is going to be an overview of the general fund and fund balance.
All right. Thank you. I don't think this will probably take the full 35 minutes, but truthfully what I wanted to do tonight before we really get into the budget work session starting this Thursday is kind of touch on some of the highlights of the general fund, set the stage, if you will, and talk a little bit about the general fund balance. I know that this is the first time that Councilmember Snipper has gone through our budget process, and it might be a good opportunity to kind of refresh folks about some aspects of that. I'd like to direct the council's attention to the page in your agenda packet that says it's titled FY 2008 Budget Summary General Fund, just so we're kind of all looking at the same thing. And I'm not going to spend too much time, but I just want to sort of recap some of what we talked about back in April when I presented my proposed budget. It's been just a little less than a month. And just make sure if there's any questions the council may have, particularly maybe about revenue, since this is really the only opportunity this evening that we have during the process formally to talk about it. If you look at the revenue section of this page, you'll notice that general fund revenues are up by about $1.5 million. And just a few highlights I just wanted to call the council's attention and then see if you have any questions before I move on to expenditures. As we discussed earlier this evening, my proposed budget reflects a 2-cent reduction in the real property tax rate. As Ms. Brooks noted during her comments for the public hearing for the constant yield tax rate, even with that reduction, that would still result in additional revenues to the city, primarily due to increase in assessed values. We have very strong values, property values here in Tacoma Park, and like many areas of the county, even with reductions in tax rates, the city is still increasing its property tax revenues. Also included in the section that's referred to as taxes and utility fees are income taxes. And as I mentioned about a month ago, this has been an area that I think the city, like other jurisdictions, has historically struggled to try to hit the mark. It's kind of not an unpredictable revenue source per se, but it's difficult to get accurate information from the state. What has typically happened is after the fiscal year ends, we'll end up with this surprise check anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 a year. So this year we kind of made some additional efforts between Ms. Brooks and myself to try to figure out how to maybe hit the mark a little bit closer. Talk to some colleagues, but certainly in looking at their experience, they probably have had just as much challenge as we can. So we did, with the assistance of the county executive's office, locate someone in the county finance department who essentially is the economist for the county. He was kind enough to share with Ms. Brooks and myself sort of their history, and what we basically did is look at our trends in terms of what was happening with either percentage increases or decreases, try to see how that correlated to the county's experience, kind of use some judgment. So much of the increase for the taxes and utility fees, it's essentially two things. It's going to be the increase in property tax revenues and what we're projecting to be increases in income tax revenues. Kind of just moving down the lines, there's not much of a change in licenses and permits or fines and forfeitures. One of the areas that you may note that there's been some increase from budget to budget would be in the use of money and property, and this is essentially the interest income or investment income that the city gets on its surplus cash. I think there's really two things going on. Certainly interest rates, I think, have gone up, which means that we're going to get a little bit more in terms of investment earnings. And I would also like to take the opportunity to compliment Ms. Brooks for the work she does. She really watches the cash very closely, I think does an excellent job of trying to time our investments to when that cash might be needed. And I think that's something she does extremely well. In terms of charges for service, it's really the difference between FY07 budget and what I'm projecting for FY08 really comes down to one thing, which is a $130,000 payment that we're expecting to receive from WSSC during FY08. I think as some of the council members may be aware, when WSSC is going to come into the city and do some major work on our roadways, we have been successful in negotiating payments from them to compensate the city, if you will, for those repairs. Typically what we have tried to do is coordinate work that WSSC is doing with street restoration work that we might be doing, so you don't basically put down a brand new street and have them come and tear it up. That's been historically an issue between municipalities and utility companies all across the country. In FY08, we do expect to receive a payment of $130,000. I would note, as we'll be talking about fund balance a little bit later in the evening, those are not streets that are scheduled for restoration in FY08. They are actually otherwise rated in good condition. They're a little bit farther down the road, no pun intended, in terms of our street restoration plan. So while we will receive the money in FY08, it'll essentially be held in escrow until those streets actually come up on the city's schedule. In terms of intergovernmental revenues, one of the things I just wanted to mention in terms of changes between the two fiscal years is if you look in the detail in your budget binders, what's referred to as the police rebate. This is a payment we received from Montgomery County. It is it's 48 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. That's a formula basis between the county and the city. So certainly as the county's overall property tax values have risen, the revenues we receive from that source will also rise. So that's essentially a payment from the county to the city. The only other minor change in revenues that's really worth noting is in the category that's known as miscellaneous. The council over the years, it was my years with the city, has expressed some concern about the burden, if you will, that Tacoma Park taxpayers were having to bear for the cost of the temporary day labor site on New Hampshire. This has been, at least the last 2 years, has been something that we have shared with the county almost on a 50-50 basis. The county, I think as the council certainly knows, and many in the community may be aware, fully funds some of the other centers in the county, including one that just opened recently just outside the city of Gaithersburg. We were successful in getting the county to agree to fully fund our temporary site in FY08, and that basically accounts for the difference in the miscellaneous category of revenue. Kind of in a nutshell, there's certainly some minor changes that if the council refers to the detail in the budget binder, you may have some questions about, but I think that's kind of a good snapshot of what's happening on the revenue side of things. Clearly, one of the concerns that we'll just have to watch throughout this week and adjust to it as we have to is this whole issue of the tax duplication payments. Right now, we have anywhere from $0 to roughly $275,000 at risk, depending on the county council's decision on Friday. So I think that's just something we'll have to see what happens on Friday. And
your budget at this point assumes the best case?
My budget, Councilmember Siemens, does assume the best case. At the time I was preparing my budget, that was really the direction that the county executives had given to the OMB staff of the county. We subsequently confirmed that with our staff contacts, and at least at the time this budget was prepared, really had no reason to assume that was not going to go through. So obviously, if that is not the case, we'll have to have some further discussions about that issue during the budget process. Yes.
Two quick questions on the revenue section we just went over. Any sense of why the budgeted and estimated for FY07 were so dramatically different?
Primarily,
the use of money?
The use of money and property. Is that the question you're
yes.
asking? It's really a function, obviously, as we are putting the budget together. It's a lot of the work on the revenue side is done in February and refined in March. Part of what we're looking at in terms of investment income also has to do with kind of the ebb and flow of expenditures, if you will, and truthfully trying to project some interest rates. That is a source set because of not knowing exactly the timing of things and what interest rates are going to do. We tend to be a little conservative.
Okay. And as you went over the $130,000 from WSSC, I believe what I heard you say was the money will be held in escrow until the streets come up on the schedule.
Right.
So that means that whatever work WSSC does will be it potentially, depending on where the street is in the schedule, for up to maybe 15 years?
I don't remember the exact time frame. I don't believe it's quite that severe. What I will do, I believe one of the streets, Councilmember Williams, in fact, is your street.
Yes.
Is ask Ms. Braithwaite, who will be before the council on Thursday, if she can basically bring with her the specific names of those streets that are affected by this and when they would otherwise come up on the city schedule.
That would be helpful.
I'll do that.
Thanks.
Other questions? Revenue questions? Okay.
Okay, kind of moving on to expenditures. expenditures are up, as I shared with the council back in April, by about $1.5 million. Like other service industries, if you will, a lot of the city's budget is basically driven by personnel costs. And of that $1.5 million, about $826,000 of that increase is attributable to personnel-related costs. Without getting into kind of excruciating detail, just a few things that probably drive that $826,000 figure. As the council is aware, the city ties its market adjustment to a federal index, specifically the Department of Labor Wage and Salaries Employment Cost Index for state and local governments. And we look at that every December, and that basically determines what our market adjustment is for the following July. In fiscal year 08, that market adjustment, according to that index, will be 3.5%. We also, in the very waning hours of trying to get my budget out, actually it was the week before you got your budget document, we were notified by the state retirement plan that they were increasing the city's base contribution rate. That just basically affects civilian employees who work 20 hours or more per week. That has an associated cost of $160,000 in FY08. One of the things that I think all employers, including the city of Tacoma Park, are struggling with is the cost of employee health insurance. At the time I submitted my budget to you, we were anticipating an increase of about 20%. Mr. Hobbs can correct me when he returns from vacation later this week, but I believe the final number is right about 19.3, 19.4. So we're pretty much on the mark, and actually that figure was actually negotiated in a downward direction from what we initially received from our health insurance carriers. For the past 2 years, because of the police department was drastically understaffed, council requested that we reduce their budgeted salaries basically to come more in line with reality based on what we knew at that time. My proposed budget does reflect that the police department will be at full staff as of July 1st. As Chief Rakucci shared with you last month, this has been a major focus, not only of Chief Rakucci, but also Acting Chief Horsey before him. And if we're not at full staff, we will be probably within one position of being at that level as of July 1st, which is certainly, I think, a credit to both Chief Rakucci and Captain Horsey. It certainly is a difficult market, not only nationwide, but certainly in this area, and I think the department has really done a good job of trying some new approaches and trying to see if we can find quality people and get as many folks out on the street as we can. The only other thing I guess I would note relative to personnel costs is there are some, in my proposed budget, a number of instances where I am proposing that we shift some part-time hours around to basically provide a little bit more continuity and a little bit easier time of recruiting and retaining someone. Rather than having a series of part-time positions, we would have one full-time position. This is applicable in both public works and in recreation. While the overall salary dollars in most instances is pretty much the same, my proposed budget does reflect the additional cost associated with providing that new full-time position with health insurance. From my perspective, that was something that has been very, I think, consistent with the council's goal of, trying, where applicable, to try to provide health insurance coverage to our employees. So certainly that's something that you can talk to each department head about when you meet with those individuals. Before I move on to non-personnel related items in terms of expenditures, are there any questions about that? A lot of this is just a refresher from what we talked about in April, but it certainly is the biggest share of the budget in the general fund. Any questions? Okay. Just a few quick items, just to kind of refresh your memory on the expenditure side of things. These are kind of the major areas of, I guess, increase, if you will, and some items that you may want to talk to the department heads about when they appear before you over the next few weeks. I'll touch on a few public works items since that's actually coming up this Thursday. In the capital budget, there are a few items you might want to talk to Ms. Braithwaite about. One is the replacement of lights in Tacoma Junction. We have actually had, unfortunately, some situations where those lights are actually not very stable. Some of them have fallen, which certainly creates a risk management and a safety concern. The total cost of that project, which I am recommending be done as a wholesale project rather than piecemeal, is $95,000. We also have included in the CIP the proposed design of a new public works facility. There are a series of issues related to the current facility, reflecting, I think, some of the growth in our fleet and equipment. We also have some drainage problems on the site, and I've asked Ms. Braithwaite to come prepared Thursday night to talk a little bit more in detail about that issue. I encourage the council to ask her some questions about that specific item, which has an associated price tag of $75,000. Another issue relative to Public Works I just wanted to call to the council's attention is we have seen an increase, I think we're all personally aware of this, increase in fuel costs, gasoline, diesel costs. Other than personnel, that is an area where you'll see that Ms. Braithwaite's budget is up. There's also been some increase in some of her maintenance items, as I shared with the council back in April, and I think the city arborist had appeared before you, I think, at the end of March. One of the things we'd like to do in the coming fiscal year is to pay a little bit more attention and care for some of the trees in the right-of-way, and with the hope, if you will, of almost doing some wellness activities where basically we put a little bit more money in the front end of basically doing some health pruning of the trees with the hope that we can preserve more of our kind of urban forest in the city of Tacoma Park. So that might be an issue you want to talk a little bit further with Ms. Braithwaite about. Outside of the Public Works area, just some things I wanted to call your attention. I'm sorry.
Barbara,
I'm sorry, Councilmember Siemens.
Since we're on Public Works, I had one thing I would like to see presented next week when we're talking about Public Works is what the cost differential is between the retail price of gasoline that we're paying for at the local gas pumps for our city vehicles and what the wholesale price is that we're paying, or the prices that we're paying for the gasoline that we pump from our pump at Public Works. Okay. And I would also like to see for the last year how much we've spent or how many gallons we've pumped at each of those locations, how much we purchase at retail price and how much we purchase at the wholesale price. And of course, that will also lead to the question of why it has taken us so long to repair the pump at Public Works so that all of our gas for city vehicles could be purchased at the wholesale rate.
I'll share that with Ms. Braithwaite.
Thank
I'm
you.
sure if it's at all possible, she'll make sure she has that information for you Thursday evening.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I do want to, I think Councilmember Siemens, and I would extend this to anyone, if there's questions as we go through this, the sooner that you can give me an idea of what information you would like from a particular department head, that would be very helpful. So thank you, Councilmember Siemens, for the prompt. One of the other budgets that will be considered, I believe, on Thursday evening is the non-departmental budget. And I did want to just highlight a few things in that. For both FY07 and in prior years, workers' comp insurance costs were basically reflected in each of the individual departmental budgets. That was somewhat of a holdover when various positions in the city would have kind of their own cost index, if you will, and essentially particular positions in the city were essentially rated, and it was basically the cost of the workers' comp insurance was specifically tied to individual jobs, and so that system of doing the accounting made sense in the past. There are not basically those factors basically applied to particular positions or classes of positions at this time. We just sort of get a blanket insurance amount. So Ms. Brooks and Mr. Hobbs and I sort of talked about this as we went through the budget. And basically the budget that is before you essentially consolidates all the workers' compensation costs in the non-departmental section of the budget, which is consistent with how we handle the other types of insurance. But as you look kind of from year to year and try to compare, you will notice there's a significant increase in non-departmental, and I did want to mention that to you. One of the other major changes in the non-departmental budget has to do with the equipment replacement reserve. And this is something that we set aside funds every year for the future replacement of equipment, vehicles, and the city fleet. Both in FY07, that amount was $300,000. My proposed budget reflects a contribution of $500,000. And if you can defer any questions, I'll get to that a little bit when we get to the fund balance. But those are sort of the major changes in the non-departmental. The only other item I wanted to just note, and this would be something that you would talk to Sarah Daines about, as you know, in accordance with the council priorities, the staff has been conducting a series of workshops for the various commercial centers in the city. Ms. Daines recommended, and I concurred with that recommendation, is that we include some funding in the city's CIP where we could start the process of maybe implementing some of the feedback and suggestions that we're hearing from our residents. So there is $65,000 in the CIP to make yet unidentified improvements to the city's various commercial neighborhood centers. So that may be something you want to talk to Sarah about when she appears before you, which I think is the 14th. Just before we move on, is there any, especially like I say, I know we've got a couple budgets coming up on Thursday, and wanted to see in particular if there was some information that staff should be gathering in preparation for those sessions.
Anything? Well, this is really going to be a general comment, but since you're asking about it, I'll make the comment now. When I go through the budget and I think about the budget is part of the oversight mechanism, I find it, well, in general, my sense is that this is the budget from, 30,000 feet. I'd really like to see the budget from 10,000 feet, because you can't really tell where the connection is between revenues and expenditures. And since I'm most familiar with recreation, not to pick on them, but it's what I'm most familiar with. So, for example, I can tell that we got $245,000 in projected revenues from recreation, but I can't tell which programs are generating those revenues, and so it's difficult to look at stuff on a programmatic basis. And so recreation is one that we get revenues from fees and stuff, but really not rebates. But we could look at the same thing in terms of the police department or the Public Works Department in terms of how we're being rebated. And so there's such a disconnection between where the money comes in and where it goes out that I think for me it's hard to say this is where, as a city, we can do a really good job in providing better services to our residents, and here's what the cost burden of that is. And this is probably really unique to Tacoma Park, or maybe to the state of Maryland, because I don't know any other state in the country that does it this way. But to some extent, I think that's a value judgment that we have to make when we go through the budgeting process. And to me, to look at it from this perspective, it's really difficult to do. And so I guess I'm looking for more program level budget information. And even with the program level budget information that I have some relatively significant concerns. And just for an example, the Recreation Department's total budget is $1.2 million. Their administrative costs are $554,000. And when I look at summer camp personnel costs at $40,000, community programs at $58,000, but the rec center costs $138,000. I mean, I can see that there's not a real reflection of what those true costs are. I know that it's part of the administrative budget, but I don't think it gives us an opportunity to really effectively engage the budget process when you can't see that information. And one more example, just not to entirely pick on recreation, is that I was looking at housing and community development, and let's take the Affordable Housing Fund, which looks like $139,000, although I know we spend more money on that than that on affordable housing. But of the $139,000, $33,000 is miscellaneous. And that's a quarter of the budget for Affordable Housing Fund that's miscellaneous. And that seems to me like a really large percentage of miscellaneous funds. And so, again, I feel like in terms of the oversight function and coping with it through the budget, which is where we really get down to the nitty-gritty of it, is really difficult to do that. So I guess I would like to see more information on our cost recapturing, whether it's through rebates or fees, on our program level budget, and then what we're what we're accomplishing for that, which is a different issue. And a couple weeks ago, I know I asked for information about the Extreme Horizons program and the kind of specific detailed information that it would take to really be able to evaluate the value of that program, and I haven't received any response.
It was my intention, Councilmember Clay, typically what we do when those requests are received is basically those are funneled to the department head, which your questions have been, and then they're presented as part of the agenda item for that particular department. That way, at least it's all going out connected to the item that's before you.
And to everybody.
And to everybody.
Gary?
Thank you. I would just like to voice support for Councilmember Clay's desire for more detailed programmatic information. And Barb, I hope you understand this isn't a disparaging about the budget that you've presented, but it's really a decision that I think this council should make, and that is to define what we want to see in the budget document. It's a request that I made last year during the budget cycle, that we schedule a discussion of that well in advance of your preparation of the budget so that you would know the level of detail that we wanted to see. And during that request, I also requested that we consider and discuss implementation of a time reporting system, since staff costs are the majority of the costs that we incur, that we consider implementation of a time reporting system that would allow us to capture staff time at program level, so that some of the information that Councilmember Clay was saying would be valuable. We would be collecting the information so that we could see that information.
It was I do remember the request for that discussion. It was my understanding that the city manager solicited from council members questions that they might have on the preparation of the budget and was not able to get specific information. Am I saying that correctly?
There were two council members who had made comments last year. I followed up with both those individuals, but obviously I think it was as a kind of a collective council discussion, but that is correct, Mayor. I think, if I may, in response to Councilmember Clay's questions, obviously the data is, you have to make some decision in terms of how data should be formatted within the kind of recreation revenues, if you will, within the chart of accounts. There are individual line items that add up to that. If that's something that you have a specific interest in, that certainly, it's the way the data is entered into the system, which is by certain programmatic categories. But just as in the revenue summary sheet, we don't detail every line item that makes up certain categories. The recreation things for presentation purposes are also aggregated. So if that's data that you'd like to see, that's certainly available. But if we took every revenue line item account and put it in the budget document, that's included. Ms. Brooks can correct me, but there's a considerable number of revenue line items. In terms of some of the other issues we have in the past, and if that's useful, we can do so again. Put together, I think there used to be I think we may have done this last year, a pie chart showing the various revenues that are attributable to the police department that we get by virtue of the fact we have one. Certainly, there has not been, at least to date, any direction from the council that each department is supposed to hit a certain cost recovery goal. If that's the case, then Ms. Brooks and my department are in a world of hurt, since we don't tend to generate revenues. We just spend money. But probably the most common thing that I've seen in other cities where there is a cost recovery goal that is established is relative to recreation departments. That's typically a direction that is set by the legislative body.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that the city manager's office
I'm just throwing mine up there for
but certainly, we're in a unique situation, I think, and part of what we've been facing in terms of decisions as a council, and the police rebate and whether or not we do the communications is a good example of this, where whether or not we get a rebate makes a difference in whether or not that's something that you want to consider providing as a service. And I get constituent calls ranging from charge me more taxes so we can build a gymnasium to let's dissolve the city. I mean, it really runs that range. But in general, I think the sensitivity to taxation is increasing, and I think we're going to have to really be able to look at these kinds of things. And with that in mind, I also talked to you today about an issue that I've been looking at, which is rental properties that are single-family homes that are listed as principal residences. So people are getting the homestead credit and they're renting the property. And there's an example of that right across the street from me, where I know the property has been rented for several years and it has been listed as a principal residence until just recently, when I started mentioning it to the people who live there and who run the place, and now it's all of a sudden been changed over. But I found 5 other places in the neighborhood that I know that are rentals that are principal residences, and I think it's about time that when we did an audit of that and looked at some other places where maybe we're not collecting all of our tax revenues. It's not just about this portion of the budget, but it's how can we get all the money that's due to us too? Because I think that the pressures on people, on some groups of people, low-income homeowners, senior citizen homeowners, and people who purchased in the city more recently, the tax rate is very taxing on them. It's very difficult for them to meet that, and we need to do everything that we can to make sure that the money that we're spending is where we really need to spend it. And I think that this is the tool that we have to be able to make that decision effectively.
If I could just add on to that discussion, the issue of cost recovery in recreation is something that we have talked about before. And the policy that the council set was that we wanted to see the programs for non-senior adults recover their costs, but we didn't impose that same requirement on children's programs. I don't remember what we did for seniors, but I think that seniors were sort of allowed not to recover their costs too. But I don't believe that we were specific as to what costs should be compared to the revenues in order to, but in other words, should we include a piece of administration, which I don't believe we used to. So it would be an interesting discussion to have if we could figure out a way to do that in a way that doesn't require you all to do a whole lot of number crunching between now and the time we talk about recreation.
Yeah, my understanding, Mayor, is I think the council had that discussion, I think, prior to my tenure, but there's been kind of touched on it. I think my understanding is the same as what you just outlined, is that there was not a 100% cost recovery goal for youth programs and senior programs, but that there was an expectation that costs would be recovered for other programs. I think that the issue somewhat becomes the level of subsidy, and I've seen that vary from community to community, and whether you include indirect costs such as overhead. So I have discussed that with Ms. Hadeven, and I think that's something she's prepared to come and discuss with the council.
Okay, I appreciate that. Are there other comments, Joy?
I would also second Colleen's request for the specific information about rec programs. That comes up in a week. What you have coming up Thursday. I'm still quite interested in some of the TASC recommendations, and on the library, I have yet to see anything in writing where there was correspondence between the city and the county about our library. I've been assured multiple times that the county would close our library if we asked to join their system. I haven't seen anything in writing. So if there is nothing in writing, I hope we've made that determination by scouring our records.
There was some correspondence, and I honestly don't, it was not correspondence generated during my tenure. It was prior to my tenure that was distributed to the council in the past. I can certainly redistribute that. I don't remember, Councilmember Austin Lane, the exact date of when that was given to Ms. Robbins, but I know there has been something that I've distributed during the time I've been here. So I can dig that out again. But it's not recent correspondence from the county. It probably goes back maybe.
That was prior to, I believe, Councilmember Austin Lane's first election on this council.
Okay. Yeah. So we can certainly resurrect that, if you will, and certainly I'd be happy to make some discussions, have some discussions with the county executive office staff. I think the council last talked about that specific recommendation from TASC, I believe, back in either the fall of, might have been the fall of '05, I believe. And at that time, there did not appear to be some interest in the council in pursuing that recommendation. Obviously, that's subject to the council's direction.
I think the way we left it, if I'm remembering correctly, and I wouldn't swear to it, is that we were going to see how the management of the computer center and how it added to what the library was doing before we revisited that. And so I'd be interested to see from the library director her assessment of how the management of the computer center has affected library operations. I think that's how we left it.
Well, generally, I think our library is terrific, and certainly now that it has even greater computer facilities, it's, from everything I can tell, it's even enhanced it further. What I want to make sure of as we scrutinize the budget is that given the county tax rate, I believe now being lower than our own, I'm not exactly sure if they've finalized their tax rate yet, but we really do need to do our due diligence in making sure that we're not subsuming responsibilities that the county could offer our residents. And I would appreciate if you could bring that archive document to my attention again. I'm sorry if I overlooked it before.
Now you get tons of paper. I'll find it. I'll probably have to ask Ellen for her copy again.
Okay. So that on the library. And then on Public Works, something also from the TASD report was that we calculated what our services cost per capita or per household. I can't remember which, but then we were able to compare it to what the county fee is for people in unincorporated Silver Spring, just over our city line.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Councilmember Lane or Austin Lane, are you referring to the solid waste charge? There was some information we had distributed either last year or maybe the year before on the solid waste charge.
Right.
Would you like for me to redistribute that again?
Would it be recalculated?
No, I don't think
it showed that ours was less expensive.
Yeah.
Right. I remember it being in the low 200s.
Right. I could
and
certainly
the
have
counties in the low 300s.
Right. I could have Ms. Braithwaite take a look at those numbers and see if there's been any change.
That would
I think
be
it's in the
great.
past year is when I think we distributed that to you.
Okay. I appreciate that. I really do think that if this council is to take action on the TASD report, that now is the time. This is a critical time in the political environment, and I'd like to see us really go through those recommendations rigorously and decide which to pursue. And with general government here, I'm thinking that if we can bring ourselves into the 21st century a little bit better, our residents would really appreciate that. I know that we are trying to get online forms and various computer access to program information. I really would like to see us make things that residents are required to do be as convenient as possible, such as parking permits and paying stormwater fees. And if our rec department does continue to be done in-house, I would hope that we could at least offer the same online capacity that the county offers residents outside the city, or actually that the county offers through their rec department.
Are there any other items that council wants to bring to the city manager's attention that they'd like information on?
The last thing I'll just touch on real quickly is if you can just, I think, flip to the next page, which is the fund balance projection for the general fund, and I'll just go through this relatively quickly unless there's a lot of questions given the lateness of the hour. I am projecting that we will, let me back up a minute. There's a couple components of the fund balance, and just to kind of go down the sheet, in, I think it was July of '05, the city received proceeds from a bond issuance for street rehabilitation and restoration. Those funds basically will be fully expended, have already been expended actually by the end of this fiscal year. But basically, as you go through kind of the top section of the spreadsheet, what that reflects is essentially what is referred to as the reserve portion of the general fund balance. Street loan proceeds are kind of now a moot issue, but there will be essentially three components during FY08 where we are setting aside money, and it's essentially considered reserved or restricted. One component is essentially referred to as the emergency reserve, and I don't know how far back this provision in the charter goes, but there is a provision in the charter going back a number of years where we were to set aside, I believe it was $250,000, and put it into essentially an emergency reserve fund. Since that time, it is not a fund that has basically been increased, but any kind of interest earnings based on that original amount have continued to grow. And those monies are basically, can only be expended upon direction by the council, and there's some specific requirements in the charter that outlines the purposes for which those can be spent. The other thing I touched on briefly was the equipment replacement reserve, and this is a fairly common practice among cities. People handle it different ways. Some do revolving funds, and others do what Tacoma Park has done, which is to basically have what's referred to as equipment replacement reserve. We have this really huge spreadsheet that Public Works helps maintain, and what we have tried to do is to look out literally 15 or 20 years and see when equipment is basically going to become obsolete, and basically plan for that future replacement. I think this council during my tenure here has had to buy a new trash truck to the tune of over $800,000, and that's not the kind of cash you can just sort of come up with overnight. So we try to set aside some money, for instance, in that example, every single year, so when that trash truck no longer has a useful life, we have the cash in hand to pay for it. There have been years, I think where the city, if you go back in recent history, for a number of years, we were setting aside $100,000 a year. I think there was actually a year in the last 5 years where we didn't set anything aside. I recommended to the council last year that we set aside $300,000. And if you look at the spreadsheet, the line that says equipment replacement reserve, one of the things you'll notice is that during the current year, we're going to set aside $300,000 in the equipment replacement reserve, but we're going to spend just over $330,000. And that's going to be a kind of a timing issue every year, depending on what equipment is coming up for renewal. But one of the things that the staff and I have worked on pretty diligently in the last year or two has basically been looking at what items are included in the equipment replacement reserve, and trying to go back in time and figure out why some were and some weren't. For instance, some of the Explorer was one of the vehicles in the police department. For whatever reason, going back a number of years, there was a decision made that certain police vehicles weren't accounted for in the equipment replacement reserve. Doesn't really make much sense to me, since we were basically setting aside funds for other types of vehicles. I'm not sure why not police, but
I think it was because we were placing the same number every year, so we would have taken out and put in the same amount.
These were not patrol cars. These were things like the car being used, the Explorer, which is not part of the general patrol fleet.
It's substituted for
parking.
The patrol fleet 1 year.
Yeah. So anyway, we've tried to basically look at some of those type of issues and to make sure that those items that should be accounted for in the equipment replacement reserve were. One of the things I talked to the police department staff this year is they were trying to be much more systematic and do a better job of planning for when they were going to be replacing certain radio equipment and things of that nature. One of the discussions that Ms. Brooks and I had is, well, each individual item sort of didn't meet what our threshold typically is for the equipment replacement reserve. Combine those items every year, we're totaling in the range of $30,000 to $40,000, which could be kind of a large chunk of change any given year. So we kind of had that kind of policy discussion internally of whether or not we should be including those items. The bottom line is that some items have been added. We're trying to do a much better job working with the staff of making sure that that list is updated. That will continue to be an effort in FY08 that Ms. Brooks and Ms. Braithwaite in particular will be working on with the department heads. But in FY08, I am recommending that the city set aside $500,000 for the equipment replacement reserve, just to sort of get us over the hump, if you will, with some of those items that have been recently added. Those monies are considered reserved or restricted. We don't spend them on anything else but the replacement of the city's equipment and its fleet. The last item that kind of comprises the reserve fund balance, and we already talked about this, so I won't spend any time, is the money that we will receive from WSSC during the fiscal year for streets that will be restored at some future date. I'm estimating that we will begin FY08 with a fund balance of about just over $5 million. Of that amount, about 23% is reserved for specific purposes. As we sort of go through fiscal year 08, we're expecting that we will basically be spending down some of that fund balance. Some of that is because of equipment replacement items, but I'm projecting that we'll end the year with a fund balance of just over $3.9 million, and of that amount, about 39% is reserved. So I think as we go through the budget process, one of the things that Ms. Brooks and I look carefully as we're putting together my proposed budget, is certainly that we're trying to make sure we're addressing the community's priorities and the council priorities, but I think part of our obligation to this council and to the community is to make sure that we're maintaining healthy financial reserves. I think you always try to plan the best you can, but I think unfortunately as some communities in the Midwestern part of the country just found out, when you have natural disasters or things of that nature. I myself worked in a community that had extensive damage due to a wind shear. A lot of things can come up that you don't quite expect, and maintaining some healthy reserves is very important for that reason, and it's also just to kind of help us through when you're having revenues kind of coming in at different times. We are very property tax dependent. At those low points during the fiscal year when the property tax revenues haven't come in, if we're buying large pieces of equipment or something of that nature, you kind of need a cushion, just like we all do in our own personal lives, to basically get you through those time periods when your cash flow may be low for whatever reason. So that's part of what we do as we're kind of looking at this, and why I wanted to share the fund balance with the council.
I appreciate your doing that and splitting out what's in the fund balance. I would note the city charter also says we're supposed to put aside 2-point-something% is unappropriated reserve, and that is subsumed in your unreserved fund balance, which actually exceeds that amount.
Yeah, and actually, Mayor, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's 2.5%. There is a 0.5%, and it's a 0.5% of revenues that's referred to as sort of a general contingency account. I have some discretion in terms of what that is used for. And then there's basically the 2% that is essentially what we often refer to here as the unappropriated reserve, and those monies are typically used for either, like the budget amendment we talked about this evening relative to the design services for the renovation of this room, or sometimes the council has directed that we do special mailings or something to the community that's charged to that. But what's charged to the unappropriated reserve is basically solely at the council's direction. I would mention, just for when you look at the summary sheet, we started off talking about those contingency accounts, or whatever we want to call them, are basically set aside in the non-departmental portion of the budget. Obviously, for projection purposes, you have to assume something happens with those funds, and probably the most conservative approach, and those amounts I would add total to $467,000. All the numbers that are before you in this budget essentially assume by year end that entire $467,000 is spent. In reality, that's not likely to be the case. I realize that, but you have to make some assumption and some calculations when you're putting together a budget. In the event that those funds are not expended during the course of the fiscal year, it just merely improves the city's overall financial position.
Yeah. Actually, the point I was trying to make is, even though you don't separately identify line items for those two things, the total that you have in the unreserved fund balance is sufficient to cover both of those items plus some additional
Yeah, what we actually do as a matter of practice, and I think it's required by the charter in terms of the 0.5%, that the charter specifically requires that be budgeted as an expenditure.
Right.
In the case of
the emergency fund, yes.
Right. In the case of the 2%, the charter language is really not specific that it has to be budgeted as an expenditure. That has always been the practice of the city, just to make sure that charter provision is adhered to.
Right. Terry.
I guess I should start out with an apology. I hope I'm just trying to make sure I'm following this, okay? So basically what you're saying is that on that first sheet, in the summary sheet, where it's showing that we're planning in your proposed budget to spend $1.3 million more than our revenues, that money is going to be coming from the the fund balances of the reserves, and that will still leave us with healthy balances in the reserve, but maybe a little less healthy than it was last year.
I'm trying to make sure I'm following your question, Councilmember Siemens.
But same problem I had with your explanation.
Can you take another shot at it so I make sure I answer it correctly?
Okay, first thing is the difference between the anticipated proposed revenues and the...
Budget summary general fund, is that what you're looking at?
Yes.
Okay.
The difference between the proposed revenues and the proposed expenditures is about $1.3 million.
That's correct. That's before any revenues generated by the sale of a city-owned piece of property on Piney Branch Road.
Okay. And that even after that, and we get down to the $1.1 million,
Right.
and that money would come from the reserves?
Yeah, I think Ms. Brooks is using kind of the technical term she and I prefer. It's the fund balance, but it's essentially, that's the technical accounting term. It's essentially sort of reserve funds, some of which are restricted and some of which are not. I'm probably going to even confuse you more, Councilmember Siemens.
That's okay.
I'm about to apologize.
I'm used to it by now.
Oh, no. When we do the capital outlay, the $1.15 million that is showing in capital outlay for FY08, some of that is equipment replacement reserve funded items.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps you, but so that would be the portion of the reserve fund balance, if you will, that will be expended. It's roughly $300,000. But the rest of it is general operating monies. You're correct.
And if I could just add on to that in the same vein, that we had the same discussion last year, because last year the budget that we enacted showed $1.5 million coming out of the fund balance, but in fact we ended the year with a surplus. And that has been fairly typical of the city's experience, because, you know, we do, and you all do the best you can to project accurately, but you're conservative in your projections, which I very much appreciate. Projecting that you will use up some of your fund balance and in fact ending up with a very slight surplus is lovely. The other direction is not.
You know, I think it's obviously one of the things is by the way that the city handles these contingency accounts and budgets them. You know, truthfully, not during my tenure, certainly, and probably for those of you who are more tenured members of the council, I highly doubt there's ever been a time that those contingency accounts have been fully expended. So by practice, we budget them as expenditures, and then when you don't spend them, you end up better than you think you will be. You know, I'll be honest with you, I have doubts in my own mind, and Ms. Brooks and I have had this discussion, if maybe there's another way of accounting for those contingency accounts, it's maybe a little bit less confusing for everybody, because I think what happens is when you look at the audited financial statements in November, and if you're not this council or the staff who's sort of familiar with that practice, you always have this huge variance, and people think, boy, don't these folks know how to budget.
I think that's another good item to add to our discussion of what the council would like to see in a budget document next year.
I agree. So I think Councilmember Siemens should just touch on something I just want to note, is that we are expecting to sell the remaining city-owned property on Piney Branch Road during FY08. And
you budgeted $229,000.
We budgeted, yeah, it's actually a portion of that is just general city property that we sometimes sell. We're assuming we'll get about, I think it's $226,500 from that property. The remaining is just various items that we, you know, will sell off at some point during the year. They're just miscellaneous pieces of equipment here and there. I think time will tell whether or not we'll actually get that. That was the last offer that we had received. The council may recall that deal fell through because of some financing issues that individual had. You know, we will be putting that property back on the market, but that's certainly kind of our best guess at this point. So the section of the budget discussion always, I can tell, makes everyone's head hurt because it gets a little bit more into accounting-y, and I apologize for that. I'm just not sure any better way to try to explain it.
I like it because it's the only time I see Ms. Brooks smiling. She knows she's got us.
She cares very deeply about her fund balance, let me assure you.
Are there additional questions or comments? Did you want to add anything else, Karen?
No, like I said, I certainly appreciate the feedback we got from the council this evening. Obviously, it'll be kind of a tight turnaround for Thursday night for some of the departments. Some of the issues the council had raised I had anticipated. Some I did not, so we'll certainly do our best to try to see if we can get that information turned around for you. My guess would be, in talking to Ms. Carpenter about getting the agenda packet out, obviously we'll try to get it out ahead of time. We can email that to you, or certainly we make hard copies, but we'll let you know as soon as that information is put together so you have an opportunity to review it. Encourage you, if there's any other things you think about with the other departments coming up. I think the schedule is on your rolling agenda. Please let me know as soon as possible what information you'd like staff to compile. I think it just makes the whole process go much more smoothly, and we want to make sure you have the information that you need.
Is there anything else? There's nothing else. We're adjourned.